Okay, so welcome to what is sort of the inaugural episode of the Berkeley Genomics podcast. I'm Tsvi Benson-Tilsen, and with me today is Lauren Pope, who is the acting director of Rehumanize International. So I'll say my understanding of what Rehumanize International is about, and then you can correct me.
Yeah.
Or elaborate. So basically my understanding is that there's an idea which you call the consistent life ethic?
Consistent life ethic, yeah.
The CLA, the consistent life ethic, which basically is the idea of fundamentally valuing all human life, or maybe a little more precisely, opposing all aggressive violence, meaning injuring or killing any living human, whether it be just a regular kid or adult, or even an embryo, or someone who's been convicted of whatever heinous crime, or civilians in war zones. And so that's the idea, and then this unfolds into various policy advocacies such as nuclear deproliferation, opposing IVF broadly, and other things. So yeah, is that about right? And tell me.
Yeah, that's pretty right. So I will say on IVF, just for a quick clarification, because it does, start getting into issues. So for Rehumanize International, because we are a secular organization, and kind of like within the CLE, our fundamental disagreement with IVF is because of the destruction of embryos. So we as an organization don't oppose IVF completely in general in practice. We think there are ethical ways that it could be done. It's just that if those ways involve embryo destruction, that's when we would start to get concerned. So there's sort of, there are people obviously, especially Catholic theologians, who would oppose IVF generally, but our concern is the destruction of embryos related to it.
Gotcha. Makes sense. That's
Yeah.
a good clarification. Thanks. So I do want to jump into that stuff, but first let's just back up, and if you wouldn't mind saying a bit about, I'd love to hear about sort of your story, your history, how you got into this. Yeah.
Of course. Okay, so I'm Lauren Pope. I am the executive director of Rehumanize International, and I got into the movement broadly because I had a very premature child. So when I was pregnant with my first child, my water broke at 22 weeks, which is very, very early. And of course, at the time, I just thought, your water breaks, you have a baby, that's how this works. But actually, there are some things that they can do to try to push that off as far as possible. And so I was in the hospital for 7 weeks, just inpatient, trying to keep this baby in, and he was born at 29 weeks. But in that time, they took me to the NICU to say, here's what you can expect having a very, very premature child. And so I saw this baby who was already born, who was born, I believe, at 25 weeks. And so seeing this little girl there at 25 weeks, I was like, oh my gosh, this is an actual fully formed human being here, which made me start rethinking some of my previous stances and got me involved in basically pro-life, anti-abortion activism at that point, related to that pregnancy. But I had, before that, really been more in, let's say, like left-wing political activist circles, so opposing the war in Iraq and opposing the death penalty and those sort of things were kind of where I had started. And so they were sort of, those two positions felt not very coherent to each other, right? That politically, they didn't really fit into like that left-right dynamic. So I learned of Rehumanize International several years later that had this thing called the consistent life ethic, where they sort of took all of those human rights concerns that I had and put them together as a general philosophy of non-aggression and non-violence. And so it's very exciting to find that, hey, there are other people who actually have these same values that I hold. So we have at Rehumanize International, we have a program called Create Encounter. It is a art, music, literature contest that we run every year. And I won the prose writing contest for that several years ago. And that's how I started to get more involved in Rehumanize International. Like I went to the conference, I started becoming more involved. And then a few years after that, I was on the board of directors for several years. And then when we had the executive director position come open, that's when I moved into that. So it was kind of starting from just, oh, this sounds like a great group, to getting slightly more involved to the current state.
Cool, thank you. So just backing up for a second. Well, so first of all, your child, I think I read in your description that your child did survive. Is that right?
Yes, he survived. He is now a grown man, so he's doing very well. And yeah, he actually had surprisingly few problems from his prematurity. His lungs were very well developed for his gestational age. He was just very, very small and had to spend some time in the NICU growing, basically.
So just for context for the viewers, well, I was just Googling the numbers, and so, well, first of all, a 22-week baby would be, I guess, less than 2/3 of the way through the normal course of pregnancy, and the survival rate is maybe 5 to 10%.
Oh yeah, and he's 20 years old, so 20 years ago they didn't survive. There's even now there's one hospital, I think it's the University of Iowa, that does a very good job saving 21, 22-week babies, but it's extraordinarily technical. It's just literally like the tubes that they have to use are so tiny. Most hospitals, even today, would put viability more at like 24 weeks. It's just at your average, well-equipped NICU. So he was considered a pre-viability rupture. So basically, my doctor told me, really our options here is we can do nothing, and if he's delivered today, like he's not going to survive. Or we can try to push labor off as far as possible and give him a chance. And so obviously, we chose that latter option, but it was definitely presented as, if he's delivered today, he won't survive this.
And then they did?
Yeah, and then they did. They were able to keep me pregnant, which through a lot of drugs, which I don't know they use all of those anymore, but a lot of drugs, a lot of bed rest and all that. But I had a very good neonatal team that, were keeping very close watch on me the whole time.
And so you saw the 25-year-old premature birth, 25-week
right.
premature birth, and this kind of hooked into you sort of previously had a broadly, well, is it fair? I don't want to, you highlighted the secular nature of your organization. Yeah. I don't want to pry too much, but is it fair to, would it be right to say, if you don't mind, that you have a Catholic background?
So I'm actually Episcopalian. So, but most people in our organization do have a Catholic background. I just happen to, come from a slightly different perspective. But yeah, before I had, seen this baby, I sort of had what I think a lot of people have in terms of an abortion stance, which is, I wouldn't have an abortion, but I don't feel comfortable saying that it should be illegal because that seems too much. And so I guess we kind of call that like a personal pro-life, politically pro-choice position. And that's sort of where I was, where I felt very confident that I would not, but, not confident saying like no one should. And that wasn't really particularly a super religious stance. It was more just like a, personal vibes-based morality that you kind of have for like where your personal lines are with things. And so, but then seeing like how developed this little baby was, I was like, oh, maybe I should start rethinking some things and really like rethinking, okay, why is it that I personally think it's wrong for me? What does that imply about morality more generally, and actually kind of taking it from just a feeling to a more reasoned, ethical stance.
And is it, I'm just trying, it's helpful for me to, because I like to like, even if I disagree with someone about some conclusion, I want to keep in mind, for as long as it is the case, that I have not successfully empathized with them. And I think I personally have not successfully like fully empathized with basically your position about embryos and them sort of, basically constituting a human life in the same way that we would say that a born child does. Mm-hmm. And so your story is helpful. It hasn't quite gone into the depths of the intuitions, but it's helpful even just to have the experience of, okay, I've seen this very premature baby who's sort of just on the cusp of being third trimester pregnancy or fetus, and then I'm imagining you kind of see it and you're like, oh wow, like it's maybe the doctors would say it's not viable or very high risk, but it has eyes, it has organs, it has limbs, it's not dead. It is surviving,
right.
and
it's definitely
a living creature.
You're right. It's a living creature, and there's something that we kind of talk about, like moving backwards from that, right? Because I think that just generally, like in the abortion debate, people feel more uncomfortable with third trimester abortions than second trimester, than first trimester, right? Like there's sort of like a gradient with how just like, again, moral intuition people feel about these kind of things, where you're like, okay, this like baby could literally survive if they're delivered right now. So that feels a little sketchy. Whereas this one maybe could with a lot of intervention. I don't know there versus, okay, this is a first trimester fetus, like they obviously cannot survive in any capacity. That feels less of like I'm actually killing someone, right? But in the pro-life movement, we have sort of this concept of the personhood fairy not existing. And so it's like there's not a line, right, anywhere in that thread. Like you can feel different intuitions in different states, but there's not a hard and fast line where you say, okay, this goes from not a person here to definitely a person here. It's a gradient. And the only actual demarcation that we can make is at conception, when you go from like amphimixis, all of a sudden we have two separate cells to now we have a complete being. And then going forward, everything is a continuation from that point. And so that's why going into like embryology, we go to, okay, this is the point where we can say it went from two living cells to being a living being. And everything beyond that, it's very hard to say, okay, this is the line without invoking of the personhood fairy.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. And then, just before I more jump into the back and forth, let me just ask you, so then towards the later part of the story you told, there's a progressive getting more and more into the community and the organization, Rehumanize International, and you talked about sort of, I guess finding your sort of ideological compatriots.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting to me. Well, like, I mean, zooming out, sort of just looking at areas where I think I would basically agree with you. I mean, I am broadly like quite committed to life in general. In some cases, fairly extremely. So some examples would be, first of all, I've basically dedicated my adult life to trying to prevent the extinction of humanity from artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Also, kind of ideologically, I'm pretty against the death penalty in general, even for the most heinous crimes. I mean, I can definitely find the like instinctive reaction of like, okay, this person should just be killed. But then I kind of, my better angels, as it were, like on reflection, I'm like, well, first of all, I don't really want the government to have that power at all. It's a really irreversible thing to do. And also in like a really, in a very, I don't know what to call it, long-term or utopian vision, for the future of humanity, I would say basically everyone can be redeemed, like even Hitler. If we had sort of infinite capacity to live and reflect for a very long time, I would be like, Hitler could probably be rehabilitated or something and appropriately punished if that's something that has to happen. So I'm broadly, I very much value life.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing, like at Rehumanize, I'll say this, like two things. First of all, we pull in a broad group of supporters, and a lot of people who maybe even like speak at our conferences and that sort of thing, don't necessarily agree with us on everything, but they agree with us on this issue or that issue, and so we come together and we talk about these things, and the disagreements are okay, and we say like, no one has a consistent death ethic, although I challenge on that because now you have like these nihilistic killers who, maybe so. But generally, average people don't have a consistent death ethic. So there's something in our, general like programming that you can find yourself in agreement with. And then we sort of just ask, okay, so like, can we move closer to including more people in your circle of concern when it comes to these life issues? So I think that's actually very common when people find us, is that they're like, hey, I like what you're doing here. Not so sure there, but let's, kind of like talk about it. And then secondly, the AI is really interesting, especially you're talking about, not wanting AI to destroy us, because that's something that we have also just recently begun talking more about. Randomly, I wrote a very off-the-cuff article right when ChatGPT was coming on the scene, and for whatever reason, that has remained the #1 search result for dehumanization in AI. And I'm like, I wish it was a better article, but it's so we get a lot of people coming onto our site about that. So I would love to talk to you about that more generally, either on here or off about that, because that's something that we're also quite concerned about.
Mm. Well, I'll just make a note to circle back to that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so now, now I'd like to, dig in more. Well, I guess one more framing thing to say is, so now talking about IVF and embryos and reprogenetics, if I understand correctly, I don't think that there's like sort of logically necessarily any conflict, like in principle, between reprogenetics as like a technical aim and as a social aim, with the consistent life ethic. Basically, like this, to some extent, it's a technological question where it's like, reprogenetics, we want to empower parents to give their children genomic foundations for lives of, long, happy, healthy, capable lives. This can butt up against the consistent life ethic in several ways. A big one would be IVF. If you're creating embryos, then according to your vision of the CLE, if those embryos are planned to be discarded or actually discarded, or even if they're just sort of kept frozen and trapped, as it were, then that's a type of, that is violence and killing. And then also, I don't view reprogenetics as doing this, but lots of people have the intuition that reprogenetics, like historical eugenics, somehow reinforces or is coming from, pretty vile motivations or intuitions or beliefs or political stances. So, like, racism would be an obvious one. Like, there's types of people, there's groups of people, and different groups of people are good and bad, and the bad ones should be killed or their reproduction should be suppressed. There's also, like, somehow, like if I want to edit my future child's genome to avoid them having some disability, people sometimes say, are you saying that someone with a disability, their life isn't worth it, or they're lesser than, or they're not worth like investing in medical treatment for? And I don't agree with any of those positions, but that's a way that these things butt up. But I guess sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but I just wanted to say, I think in principle there doesn't have to be a conflict here, because in principle you can do reprogenetics without destroying any embryos, and in a way that is socially beneficial for basically everyone and doesn't interfere with other people's medical care or society valuing everyone, and so on.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of like there's sort of the two questions, right? There's like the means and the ends, that are two parts of the conversation, and they get muddled a lot, and so they get also conflated a lot, and so it's good to kind of separate them, because you end up not being able to talk about some very important things on the ends if you're only talking about, the means. So yes, when it comes to the actual way that we would practice these things, so I know that the orchid one went very viral on social media just recently, and I think kind of had like this innately repulsive thing, because there was almost a Tinder aspect where you're like swiping left or right on your children, and so that very felt wrong to a lot of people, because as it currently stands, the technology that we have right now, for the most part, is you make let's say 15 embryos, and then you're saying which of these is the best. And this has actually been in place for a while, just not so overt, right? Like just standard IVF technology, they tend to rate the embryos on, I think, like an A to F scale of like, these are the top embryos that have the best chance, but it's been framed as the best chance of successfully, implanting and growing and developing into a child, versus these embryos are unlikely to, grow and develop. And then there has also been, for specific individuals who might have a very particular genetic mutation that are trying to avoid passing forward, like cystic fibrosis or something like that kind of screenings happen. But this was on a much larger scale, and I think kind of made people confront this is like literally saying like, this is your highest IQ embryo, and that felt very, like you said, touched on the eugenics aspect and made people start to confront that end, but also made people then again come back and reevaluate, should we be destroying these 5 perfectly healthy and, would be fine to be born into this world embryos, but we're decided that they're not like the best embryos? Like that was the thing that caused some concern. So from not necessarily a consistent life ethic position, but just a general, again, ethical intuition perspective. But from our perspective, yes, like you're destroying those 5 embryos, like that is not what we want to see generally, but like specifically highlighted by this. But I do know that there are ways in theory and close to practice of like doing some genetic editing on sperm or eggs, or even creating eggs through skin cells and things like this that people are talking about, that I think there have different levels of will they potentially kill any humans. So I think that's one of those things where it's like, if we got a hypothetical way of, okay, we could do this and no embryos will be destroyed, but we're just going to make super sperm or something like that. That's what we've decided on. We're going with super sperm. They're going to be great. No embryos are being destroyed. Then we talk about, okay, we found an ethical means to do this. No one is being killed by this technology. We're just, helping out the sperm. Can we then say that what we're doing is going to result in ethical ends? And I think that there are a lot of interesting conversations that result from that are not necessarily life issues, and that they're not going to end anyone's life, but they will be impactful for lives, and so they should be discussed before just like jumping into it, full throttle.
So maybe this is not necessarily a meaningful question, but to check, actually it sounds like that last thing you were saying, actually there is potentially a softer but non-trivial potential conflict between even reprogenetics that doesn't kill any embryos and the consistent life ethic. Is that right?
And I think what it is it's not necessarily that from a life perspective. Like I think it would kind of almost get into how we as an organization feel about IVF currently, right? Like it's like, if you're not killing anyone and you're doing IVF without destroying anyone, like there might be some issues to talk about, and there are. I think the Catholic Church has some interesting concerns about like when you divorce reproduction from like the unitive act, like what does that mean for society? Like there's interesting conversations, but it's not a life issue. But the thing I think that concerns me most from a closer to a life issue is like, are we making children into commodities? And that's the one issue that I think needs to be addressed and thought about, because I hadn't really thought about this a lot before. I don't know if you're familiar at all, and I apologize in advance when I talk about this if I muddle things, because I'm talking about someone who is transgender in the both past and present tense. So just, stay with me on this.
Okay.
Elon Musk's trans daughter had made a comment basically saying, Elon Musk specifically wanted male heirs, had paid for male heirs, had sorted embryos to have male heirs, was very big on having male heirs through IVF with his first wife. And then so his daughter now, as a young, effeminate little boy, felt like a defective product and felt like she was some sort of commodity that wasn't up to specification. So I thought that was really interesting, a really interesting commentary, and I could see how that could play out, not just with gender, obviously, but in other areas where if we're saying we are selecting for intelligence, and then you're just like not very good at math. Like, how does that affect the parent-child relationship? How does that affect the child's kind of perception of themselves? So again, it's not a life or death issue, but I think it is one that needs to be reflected on before just saying, yes, this will definitely be good. So yeah, I'll let you respond to that, and then I have the issues about genetics and having illnesses and diseases and that sort of thing kind of secondarily.
Okay. Yeah. It's an interesting example. Generally, I agree to some extent. I don't know whether this constitutes actual disagreement or actual agreement or only partial agreement, but I agree that, so certainly I agree it would be bad if parents orient to their child really in any way that's majorly different from sort of the normal way that parents should, or the ideal way that parents should orient to their children. So for example, simply put, parents should be open to the mystery of the children. I was talking to my mom about reprogenetics, and she was like, you know what, I like the mystery of, you, meaning me, Tsvi, were very surprising, and I like that. I would sort of even, this sort of, as a framing statement, a lot of, in general, the way I want to approach these conversations about reprogenetics is, I like the way you put it. These are issues that should be thought about. It's not, to me, it's not necessarily, partly there is a question of, should we even do this at all? And that is a live question, with people on both sides, of course. But also it's a question, to me, it's a question of, okay, well, if we were going to do this without making a decision yet, how would we do it well? And how could we do it poorly? So in this case, this is sort of a simple thing and easy to say, but we would just want to communicate to parents very clearly, we cannot control what your child is going to be like. Even just looking at the graphs and the distributions of traits, we can kind of nudge around the average expected values of certain measured traits. So your child will probably be less likely to get diabetes and heart disease and various cancers, and they will even, I think we can say fairly confidently actually, that on average their tested IQ will be somewhat higher. But what that means but first of all, this is very distributional. It's you could just as well get a kid with whatever IQ. And also, of course, IQ is, as much as it does matter, it's only a small part of human value, human experience, what a child is, and even their performance. They could, as you say, they could be terrible at math and have some other, and be very good with words, or very creative as an artist. So it's very important that parents understand, and this should be communicated through whoever is making this into a clinical application. It should be communicated to parents, we can't control no one can control what your child will be like, and so you should be aware of that and should be prepared for that. And then, there's sort of softer things which I haven't worked out into any sort of like concrete policy, but just, I sort of broadly agree that parents should not be expecting their child to be a particular way or to satisfy a particular goal that the parents have. They should be, the kids will in fact have, a type of free will, if we admit that that's a thing that humans have.
Going all Calvinist there for a second, and
right. The kids will have free will, and so I forget where I was going with this, but kids should be treated as though they have agency, and sort of, like encouraged to apply their emotions and intuitions well, as C.S. Lewis talks about in The Evolution of Man, and should be thought of as moral agents, not as like we've made some genes and that's what enables you to do everything that you do.
Right, and I think that's something that is like very much, I guess, it's good to hear you say that, but I feel like when you're making a consumer product, right, which is like what Orchid is, like they're a consumer product, like you have like marketing language, right, and your marketing language is usually grandiose and is like, I know, I don't think that the woman, I can't remember her last name, I don't think she's particularly
Noor Siddiqui.
Yeah, I don't think she's a particularly good spokesperson for her product in some ways, because she is, I think the thing that really rubbed people the wrong way was when she was like, almost a moral imperative to do this, right? Like you're a bad parent if you're not doing this screening. And I think that that brings all the, that kind of brings also the eugenics feeling, right? When you're like, that feels like you're going to create classes of human, right? We're getting into Gattaca zone, we're getting into Claire and the Sun, right? We're having lifted and unlifted children. All of this feels not particularly, human. And so the way that you talk about those things, I think, does impact the perception, obviously, and how parents are perceiving these things and what the parental expectations are. And I think that it would definitely be important to manage parental expectations. I think also, in any kind of assisted reproduction, I haven't talked about this much, and I'll just kind of briefly touch on that, but we have the capacity now, because of surrogacy, because of IVF, because of these things, that parents could potentially, if someone who was not actually interested in raising a child, but was interested in having, again, Elon Musk style, 30 high IQ children as, for some whatever purposes, you could potentially do that, right? You have 30 surrogates, you do these things. There are things that I think would have to be much more regular than they currently are in our system before you even started down that path, that, again, aren't necessarily like overtly killing anyone issues, but they are issues that, from a humanist perspective, give me pause. And so I think about that as well. And then, go ahead. You can respond, and then I'll...
Oh, well, I was just curious for an example of what you might have in mind there for regulations in that world.
Yeah, so I think that, one, there should be restrictions on, like, how many children you are creating at any one time, right? Like, it shouldn't be that you can line up 10 surrogates and have 10 babies. I think it should be a human proportion that you could actually raise. And, obviously, many years ago, the IVF industry has gotten better at doing this now, but many years ago, they were regularly having, like, Octomom, situations because of what they were doing, and they changed that because they realized, like, that is not good for anyone we try to minimize this as much as possible to give children an actual best chance of thriving is within a family structure that can, facilitate them. So making it so that someone cannot just go basically buy 10 children, which is something, that unfortunately you see news stories happening, that there are kind of these, like, baby factories, not so much in the U.S., but there are some. There was something in California just recently, which again is like basically treating children as commodities. So something like that I think would be important. I think that there are general issues within like donor conceived communities that I've listened to a lot, where you might have one, sperm donor who has hundreds of biological children, and that creates all kinds of situations where like they might meet each other as adults and marry each other and like things like this. And so there's a lot of push there that you shouldn't be able to create hundreds of children just generally. That shouldn't be something that's able to be done. So taking that to this kind of technology too, like it should be something that is done for family creation and not for some sort of either financial incentive, or which is like in the case of like massive sperm donors, it's generally financial incentives, or because you're trying to do, for lack of a better word, something weird. You're trying to create your your little cult offsprings or whatever. We should be reflective of how that technology is being used, and make
interesting
boundaries.
Yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah,
this is interesting. I mean, I honestly just haven't thought about this at all. The question of regulating number of kids per year or something.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to say, right, like I'll say this briefly, like I'm not trying to say like you people like that kind of gets into like you should have a license to have a child, and like let's regulate how big families can be, and I'm not trying to get into that, but just like from a like perspective of like how many children could you naturally have, in a year, how many children could you naturally do. I think we should try to keep things tied to biology as closely as we can, just because if you're literally talking about children who are trying to be created, and not like some sort of weird baby factory, or like, again, it goes into science fiction things, but like being raised by some conglomerate, or like it should be people who are trying to have a family, not a corporate interest or something like that.
Okay, so I'm trying to I'm not even sure whether or not I disagree, because I haven't thought about this, but
Yeah.
let me, just as like an exercise, and this probably touches on some broadly related themes to embryos and stuff. Just let me try. So, like, I'm trying to kind of like compress what you're saying down into my version of intuitions. So what I'm getting is there's one root thing, which is basically just this is unnatural, where this means having many, many kids from one sperm donor, or through lots of surrogates, or what have you. So it boils down to one thing, which is this is unnatural, and then that kind of buds off several different concerns. So I think I heard at least three. One was in the sperm donor case, it's like, well, the kids could grow up and meet and have their own kids, and then now they have genetic collisions.
Incense, and all this stuff.
And then there was also, I was inferring or guessing, or maybe you said something to this effect, that there's an issue with care, basically, where, you said kids raised by a conglomerate, where the alternative would be raised by a parent who is giving appropriate attention and love and care to to an individual child, which you can't do if you have 20 kids in a year. And then there was a third thing, which was, maybe I'm forgetting, or maybe it's just the general idea of, kids being commodities.
Yeah, just kind of the commodification. And I think also this is tangential but important to talk about, is like obviously there is artificial womb ideas like that happening, but in the current state it's also literally women who you are also, surrogacy has a commodification element too, which is something that needs to be is concerning, needs to be addressed, and obviously different countries have different regulations and rules related to that, but is another factor that can't just be overlooked, because if you are having all of these children, then there are all of these women who are impacted by those decisions until artificial wombs, and that's a whole separate thing. But
yeah, I mean, I guess just on that point, like an example, a sort of moral comparison that I have been using recently is organ transplantation. And so it's sort of like, on the one hand, there are like pretty significant concerns where you're commodifying pieces of human body. So first of all, so like for example, doctors might feel pressure some decision makers to prematurely take organs out of people who are not actually dead yet. There's sort of urban legends about people kidnapping people and stealing their organs, which maybe happens sometimes. A more realistic thing would be exploitation, which is sort of more analogous to some surrogacy cases, where it's not that you're physically forcing someone to do something, but you are finding someone who's vulnerable. Maybe you are using force to make them more vulnerable, and then using their vulnerability to get them to do something that harms themselves, like to give an organ or carry a child.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, like organ transplantation is like kind of obviously good. It's like,
right. And it's with the organ transplantation.
A dozen people die on the wait list every day.
Right.
It saves tens of thousands of lives every year.
Yeah. I read a very interesting article just recently about organ transplantation. It was basically they're talking about like the idea of brain death is a little bit like not as clear cut as we would like it to be, and we kind of like look the other way on it because of the benefit and because the detriment. Like this person's like in very, very, very poor neurological health. It's like there are some like. Basically, when they were trying to come up with the actual definition of brain death, that was the kind of the argument. It was like, well, look at how much good is being done by this. Look at this. Like, I think we can maybe be a little bit skirting the edges. And so, and there was, I think it was the New York Times, was it New York Times? Anyway, some major maybe it was the Atlantic, just posted a story that kind of called that into question. And so a lot of people were like, oh, I'm taking myself off the organ donation list. I don't feel comfortable with this anymore. What is this happening? Which is interesting to me. It's interesting that I think that if you gave people the actual honest truth about it initially, that it was like we brain death is complicated. We think we have it right, but you're going to be saving all these people. They might still be more inclined to do that than if they feel like they're being lied to and tricked and that their organs are going to be taken when they maybe, So it's interesting coming from just like how do we talk about these things perspective? Because I think that very few people would just in general have a ethical qualm about organ donation, especially again, like I said, when you are talking about brain death and that things. But it's like when you dig into the details and they're not quite lining up how you thought they were, that people start to question the whole situation. And so I think honesty about that is very important. But I also wanted to talk about going way back to people who have any kind of genetic disability and that sort of thing, and how this impacts all of them. So our board president for Rehumanize International, Beth Fox, she was prenatally diagnosed with Turner syndrome and sort of a unknown muscular dystrophy. They didn't know what was wrong with her, but they told her parents that it was unlikely she would survive till birth, which she did, obviously. She's our board president. She's 33 years old. But she does have the conditions that they said she was going to have. Because a lot of times you hear prenatal diagnosis and like, oh no, it was wrong and everything's fine. Like that wasn't the case. She does have these conditions. She has some sort of muscular dystrophy that they don't actually even have a name for still, even now. And she is actively dying. And they didn't think she would make it to 30, and she has. So she has this condition, right? And what she would like to say when it comes to this is, I want to focus to be on like adults with these conditions. I know it's much more challenging, right, to do like CRISPR editing and things like that in an adult population. There are some things that we have actually figured out how to treat, but it's harder, right? It's harder to say as an adult we're going to figure out what's wrong, and fix it, versus starting at the beginning. And so that's something though in the disability community that I've heard is like we feel like we're being like ignored, left behind, people don't care about people who are actually living with these conditions today. They're just saying, and again, going back to like how it's currently done, we'll just destroy anyone who has this condition so that they're never born in the future. That's kind of the general feeling in the, I would say not 100% completely disability rights community, but like a large part of them feel like you just want to make it so that none of us exist, but also you're not helping me as an adult living with this condition today. So that's the challenge that I think you're facing when you talk about those kind of things, just like right now.
Yeah. I mean, it's cheap for me to say this, but just to say it anyway, I certainly don't want there to be a trade-off between reprogenetics and treating living children or adults. I mean, I want everyone to be healthy and happy and as capable as they want. And like, I don't really, like, I want to be honest. I want to be like maximally honest here. Like, yeah, it's true that, if there was very wide uptake of reprogenetic technology such that, say there were 100 times fewer, whatever it is, let's say deaf people, or blind people, then probably like kind of in the relative rankings of how much research goes into various diseases, like very, very broadly speaking, there's more resources like funding and scientific talent going into more common diseases. And so if some particular, not necessarily disease, but what's the most polite general way, like abnormality or
genetic mutation or something. I don't know if that's even any better.
Well, I just mean the condition, whether or not it's genetic. But condition, I guess.
Condition. I think condition is fair to say.
Yeah. So whatever condition it is, if reprogenetics greatly decreases the prevalence of that condition, then ceteris paribus, there could be at least less relative resources going into that, and maybe less absolute resources. And so, yeah, that's valid. I guess, like, this sounds, in a purely kind of like cold, like economic budgeting sense, I don't actually think that that's bad in and of itself, for the following reason. Basically, the argument is saying we would decrease, if we greatly decreased the prevalence of this condition, then more resources would go into treating or curing other conditions. Well, so that means overall we've decreased the prevalence of conditions in general that people would rather not have. So ceteris paribus, that's good. How would you?
Right, but then it's like, but then when you're the one living with the condition, then you're like, well, okay, but what about me here? And it is interesting because I think we see this the most clearly with Down syndrome, because Down syndrome in a lot of countries, you just don't see people with Down syndrome anymore because the abortion rate for Down syndrome or genetic testing now is so high. And so then it's like, what do the resources look like, right? If you were in Iceland, which has a Down syndrome abortion rate of almost 100%, but you're the one person in Iceland, like you're a Catholic in Iceland, you have your child who has Down syndrome, who's now in the public school system, who has literally no idea how to educate a child with Down syndrome because they haven't had one in 5 years. You kind of create the system where the people who are living with these conditions are left out to dry. And it's interesting, again, going back to like means and ends and what we do in the interim and all of these things. I saw recently that in Japan they were experimenting with actually removing the third copy of the chromosome and basically correcting for Down syndrome. And so that would be their, again, going back to the reprogenetics, if you were doing that, if you were doing IVF, they could potentially take the actual same child who has who would have had Down syndrome, but they removed that copy and now they will not have Down syndrome. Without what the current system is, where you just are killing anyone with Down syndrome. That's obviously a big improvement, right? Like, I think from a consistent life perspective, we would rather see someone who isn't able to go on and live their lifespan versus killing them. But what does that mean for people who still slip through, right? Because not everyone is going to be using the repo technology, and you're going to have some stratification. So you're going to still have some people who slip through, to still having these conditions. And if we're not putting resources towards them anymore because we have redirected towards the repro side, it's like we've created kind of a system where people are left in a lurch. And I think that we need to recognize that if we've done that, if we've created this dynamic, then we're going to be leaving people feeling pretty betrayed by it. There's going to be people who feel like their lives aren't as meaningful, that and all of these things. And so even if that isn't the intention, and I don't think it is the intention, I think the intentions are broadly good, we still have to look at the impact. And so that's something that I think, again, and this does tie into CLE things, is when we look at the impact, we also have to keep in mind that we live in a society that is heavily pushing towards euthanasia right now in a lot of areas, right? We're pushing towards that in the UK, pushing towards that. US, it kind of slowly spreads. Obviously, Canada with MAID. So if we're also saying to people, well, we're not going to really support you anymore, but if you're interested, we do have medical aid in dying. It's great. We're creating, a path towards making that look more enticing, which I think is something from the CLE perspective that we're very concerned with, is anything that is pressuring people towards an early death is what we want to avoid.
Yeah, I mean, these things get very confusing to me. I mean, on the question of euthanasia, I don't know any facts, and I haven't really thought about it much, but kind of my prior stance would be something like the sort of original abortionist line of safe, legal, and rare, where I kind of, in principle, do think that, I mean, as horrible as it is to think or say, in principle, I do think people should probably have the right to end their own life. It's very, very sticky, very tricky, and I can totally see. I mean, I hear sort of very creepy stories of people being pressured or put or just nudged or towards euthanasia, towards euthanizing themselves, and even there where it's fully voluntary, if you don't support people, don't try to get them support, and it feels very complicated, because I feel where you're coming from in general with several of these questions, I mean, this is just a guess, tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel it's partly I don't want to say symbolic, but kind of what values are we affirming by making these particular policy decisions? And it's if we just say, yeah, euthanasia is fine, then we're kind of affirming some sort of horrible value picture where if their lives are so horrible that they would want to choose that, or they might think that they should choose that, that's fine. So we'll euthanize you. We don't need to worry about the context, the precursors to that situation. We don't need to fix that. And I don't know how to think about this affirmation of values thing. And then also, kind of combined with the affirmation of values thing, is just the concrete consequences of creating societal niches, where it's now you, by making this normalized or common or whatever, now you have a company that serves up euthanasia. Now they have interests in this, and they're just they're just making it easier, and they're promoting it or whatever. So there's all these second order effects that are. I find it very hard to think about those, and find it hard to think about how you're supposed to regulate those, or communicate, but they're very real effects.
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple things there. So the disability rights community, every disability rights agency group that has a stance against euthanasia, at least the last time I checked. Some of them don't take a stance at all, but because of like this one very particular thing, which is in general, as a society, we try to do suicide prevention, right? Like we are like on, at the end of a television show, it's like, if you are feeling suicidal, call the suicide helpline or whatever. Like we try very hard to discourage suicide generally in society, unless you are very disabled, in which case it becomes, actually, for you in particular, maybe suicide is not just an option, but maybe it's a good option. And that becomes, like you said, it's kind of like the cultural story we're telling. Really complicated when it comes to, you hit on both of them, government and also like corporate interests. So Canada, I particularly, so here's my, I don't know, probably the stance that I have that fits the least in any political category. I think that Canada and coming UK are particularly ill-equipped to deal with assisted suicide because they have a universal healthcare system where the government is literally paying for people to have care, and so they have a fiscal interest in denying care. They have a fiscal interest in, instead of providing for your continued cancer treatment, here's MAID that costs us 30 cents, that saves us money. And I mean, they literally talk about this, right? That makes me very uncomfortable, even as someone who, in theory, is very supportive of everyone having access to a universal health system. Having it be the government makes me scared because of those perverse incentives, especially when you tie in euthanasia into that, because then it's like, I don't want to be in a position, I don't want anyone to be in a position where it makes fiscal sense for their, budget if more people are killing themselves. That seems very against all of our interests. So I feel very, it sort of goes back to the death penalty. I don't like the death penalty in part because I don't want the government having the power to kill people. The same when it comes to euthanasia. I don't want the government, killing, in the business of killing people generally. And
now that you draw this out, it is more stark that this is really like pretty close to straight up like classical, like early 20th century eugenics, where like the most like the, well, even leaving aside the racism stuff, but to me, like, among the highest octane, like, horrifying versions of eugenics ideology, insofar as I've studied them just a tiny bit, is something where the logic is something like, you, a sick or disabled or feeble-minded person, you're a burden on society. You're a burden on me. If you have kids, you're going to create more burdens. And so we as a society have an interest in decreasing the number of people that are like you, even if that means coercive stuff like remigration or forced sterilization or pressured sterilization or weird, creepy government programs to somehow influence populations' reproduction, or euthanasia. So it's like it's this logic of like our collective interest and our collective power as the state trumps your freedom and your your rights to bodily integrity and
Yeah, there's a Nazi propaganda poster, because I'm not sure like how much of this you've dug into, but one of the earliest groups of people who were marked for extermination within Nazism were the infirm, right? People who were in basically institutionalized housing. And there was a Nazi propaganda poster that says, it has a man in a wheelchair, looking very sad, and it says it cost 60,000 francs, whatever, a year to care for this man. My fellow German, that's your money too, And so just directly saying this man's life is costing you taxpayer money. Should he be alive? No, because it will save you money. And obviously, we're not making propaganda posters saying that, but the concept of putting it into our line items of this is a cost-saving measure is doing that, behind the scenes as actuarially. So, that's a concern to me, is how the government plays into those types of decisions. And then But also, when you have corporate interests and they are also selling this product, right? Again, we go back to like they have interest in more people signing up to go to their death pods or whatever, in Sweden. Like it helps them financially. They want more people to do this, and so they're going to be doing whatever anyone is doing when they're trying to sell you a product, right? They're trying to convince you that you should do this, and what they're trying to convince you that you should be doing is die. And so, yeah, very uncomfortable with that dynamic as well, both from the government and the corporate side. And I think that it goes back to just like to bring it all around when it comes to what do we then do with people who are in incredible pain, people who are having, like these terrible struggles at the end of their lives, which of course like is a very real thing that really does happen. And I think that the biggest thing, and this is again is a controversial stance because of a lot of other issues, but we have gotten afraid of pain control in the country because of the opiate crisis, because of these things where people are even at the very end of life kind of afraid to appropriately treat pain. And especially in hospice, right? I don't know if you've ever heard this, but people are like, they killed my grandma in hospice because they gave her so much morphine. And so families will say, don't give my family member who's dying that much morphine because that's going to, hasten their death. And the answer to that is it might a little bit, right? Like maybe a few minutes, they might die slightly sooner, but not in pain. And that wasn't the intent. And there's like the concept of, the laudable effect. So like your intention is to remove the pain. Your intention is not to kill this person. No one is actually profiting from them having better pain relief. They are living their full lifespan, maybe ever so slightly different, but they are not in pain. You're trying to limit their pain. And if they died, 3 hours sooner than they would have, it wasn't the intent. And I think when you kind of are keeping that in mind as our intent is to try to reduce pain versus we have created an entire government and corporate system to kill people, I think that you generate a much greater, life-affirming stance there at the end of life. And so I think that instead of trying to push for assisted suicide and euthanasia and whatever they call it now, you can't even say suicide. I might get in trouble for saying suicide so much. We're supposed to say medical aid in dying. I was in a Plow talk that got censored because of that. But
guess we'll find out.
Yeah, we'll find out. It was the title included suicide, so I think if you leave suicide out of the title, we're probably okay. But if you're not talking about those things, if you're talking about those things as like the objective good, it creates all of these social implications. So I think that we should instead be talking about how we can actually be medically supporting people at the end of their lives to reduce their pain, to reduce their suffering. And when it comes to some issues, like in Canada, it's like if you're anorexic, they might, approve you for MAID. Like those type of things we should be really strongly affirming. Like, no, you don't need to die. You need psychiatric help. We can help you. We can do something to get you treatment, to treat your despair, not to just say, you're right, we'll kill you. Send your parents a postcard,
So, okay, I guess I'm sort of struggling with the following in general. Well, I'm not sure which branch to take.
Sorry, I threw a lot at you.
No, you're good. This is great. It's good to have too many branches. One comment. So you were talking about let's see. A while ago, you mentioned the thing where Noor Siddiqui, the CEO of Orchid, was saying, well, actually, it's kind of a moral imperative to use this technology if your parents planning to have children. And this is like an awkward thing for me because I will have to admit that actually I agree with her in a sense, and I want to be careful here already, even in this context, where what I mean is if someone comes to me and I believe that they are appropriately sort of like self-sovereign in terms of their moral agency. In other words, I believe that they're doing a good, like, conscious process of reflection about how to go about having children well, and they won't be sort of pushed or overly slapped around by my expressions of my opinions.
Mm-hmm.
If I believe that, then and they ask me, like, should I use this technology? I'm like, yes, I think you should. Like, it would lead to a greater chance of happy, healthy, capable lives for your children, and that's a good thing. And it's and like even like to some extent your responsibility as a parent is to provide for that for your child in all the different ways, genetically, but also good nutrition and good environment and raising them with care and so on. But I feel quite uncomfortable, for reasons that we've discussed, with like saying that in public at all, or especially like kind of pronouncing that without any without all that additional context. And I don't know how to think about that. Like, if I have this moral opinion for what should an individual, what's my moral advice for someone? It's yes. But if the question is, what should we as a society have as a moral norm? Then I'm like, that seems actually quite plausibly quite bad to have a social moral norm of you should use this technology for reasons we've touched on, where like, so now you're pressuring parents into using technology they might not be sure about. You are saying if you don't use this technology and then your kid needs help, well, that's your fault. You should have used this technology. Now we're not gonna help you, because why didn't you just prevent this in the first place? That's kind of like soft eugenicsy in the bad sense.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, but I don't know how to. It's a bit of a paradox. I don't have a point. I guess it's a question.
Yeah,
like,
it's a question, right? And I think that there's certain advice, right? I'm assuming that you're Jewish. Is this correct? Just based on your name?
Correct.
Okay,
most people think I'm Swedish.
Really? Okay.
Like Sven, yeah.
Sven. Okay. I have a son named Finn, so. Okay, so I asked just because I know that it is pretty common in the Jewish community that because of Tay-Shacks to have, before you're even married, before you're even a couple, to see if the two of you are carriers. And then if you are both carriers, strongly, maybe now because of IVF it's not as much, but in the past, like, strongly discouraged you from getting married because that would be, a potential. And the same thing with if you both know that you're carriers for cystic fibrosis or some of these other conditions where, like, like, this is a thing. And there's, like, the preconception, I guess, genetic testing that people do to inform them of their decisions. And so I think that we see those type of things. And I think that that you can promote, I think, really as, like, this is an unmitigated good. Like, having that information that that both of us are carriers of this condition, so we are going to alter our decision-making process. I don't think there's any problem with that, right? Like, I know that some people online were like, well, what's the difference between telling women not to drink? Like, okay, we're not saying don't make any decisions, don't make any, conversation. Like, you we do have some technology. You can be aware of these things. And I don't think there's, like, any ethical, problem with, like, that sort of thing. And again, if you we're going into it for, like I said, like, we've figured out a way to do this without destroying any embryos, that we can also prevent some of these conditions. I think having that kind of conversation as, like, part of, okay, when you're getting married, you are aware that you are both carriers for this, so let's, like, try to address that. I think that's also a way. I think where it gets into the concern, I think that there's, like, the health aspect and then there's the optimization aspect, right? And I think that those are where, when you start talking about optimizing, you start getting into sort of this weird, like, what are we really talking about? And I think that it's, like, it's also, I think we have to be honest about how much we're optimizing, right? Like, when it comes to IQ, like, it's still going to be in the band between you and your partner for the most part, at least what we currently have, from my understanding. So, is it really, do we have a moral imperative, right, to make sure that we have the highest end of that band that we possibly could? Or is it just reasonable to say that instead of like optimizing via like technology, you optimize via just like, natural selection, like marry someone who has these values that you want to have your children have, and you'll be okay. I mean, I'll say this, like, I have 6 children. I don't know if I made that clear at all. I have 6 children. Yeah, we have, and I also have an extraordinarily smart husband who I don't want, like, it gets weird talking about this kind of stuff, so I don't want to, but like his job is literally like teaching people how to, excel on tests. So he's extraordinarily smart. So all of our children are very smart. Could they have hypothetically, some of them, not the ones that actually exist, but could I have optimized and made them a little bit smarter, all on the high end? I mean, potentially, maybe. Could I have selected for things that aren't so great? One of my daughters is epileptic. That's not great. Don't love epilepsy, but like, I love her as a person, Yes, but is there like a moral imperative? Would I have been actually improving based on just what we kind of naturally got as two parents who, share values and systems and intelligence? I don't know. I don't know how much value we're actually extracting there, especially because like the people who would be willing to do this, and I think this is also an important thing, are probably already kind of on the high end of the bell curve generally, right? Are we going to be convincing people who are like not actually all that intelligent? Like, are they who's being targeted here? Are we already targeting people who are intelligent and marrying intelligent people, and who are, like, who's being targeted? How much are we helping? So when we're talking to people, like, what are we really saying to them? Who are we really talking to? And if we are talking to people who are just the average person, middle of the road, like, I think it's going to be a lot harder to sell, because you're asking them to, you're kind of implying that like they're not good enough on their own, right? Like they can maybe push their children to this higher level, but that they themselves aren't capable of achieving. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's a weird messaging. I guess my answer to you is like, how do you talk to people about these generally and like people specifically? It's hard, right? Like it's not one message that you're giving to everybody. It's like depends on who you're actually trying to reach and for what purpose. I guess and I think that's like the question I would ask you is like, for what purpose? What are we ultimately trying to do here? Like, what are you ultimately trying to do here?
So, okay, yeah, that was a lot of stuff. Lots of good. No, it's great. I don't know if I should be interrupting sooner or what.
Look, I took an Adderall to try to keep focused, but it's still, you get ADHD brain here a little bit.
Okay. No, yeah, I mean, it's, like I said, it's great. Okay, I think I'm just going to jump backwards a few points, but I have not forgotten what you just asked me.
You're good, yeah.
And we'll come back to it, yeah. So one thing, so I'm going to connect this back. So you brought up the Tay-Sachs pre-screening, where you're not screening embryos or destroying embryos. You're testing beforehand and making choices about who to have kids with based on genetics. And you were saying you basically don't see a problem with that. And now, but so connecting that back to earlier, we were talking about there was the thing about cystic fibrosis, or I forget, maybe you said muscular dystrophy, where it's like, well, you're decreasing the number of people who are like me. And so, first of all, you're like it kind of seems like you're affirming some sort of value that I'm maybe worth less, or it's like not, or a life with my condition is not worth living, or is so extremely bad that it's to be avoided at all costs. And then also practically you are probably decreasing the relative or absolute amount of like resources gone into treating me, curing me, medical science. And that would still apply in the pre-screening case. So is that, what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's a good criticism. I think that is true. I think that that's worth acknowledging that, that would. And I think that, again, it kind of gets into the ends and means conversation where it's like it is a ethical means. Is the ends completely unethical, or is it like it has trade-offs? And some of those, like I think that you're right, like that it does have like that same impact. And so I think that it feels like less ethically problematic because the means aren't the problem, but it does still have the same ends. And I think that is, good to reflect on. I don't think that it necessarily changes how I feel about it being done, but it is something to then reflect on, because I think you're right. We are saying that we do not want more of, like, this condition is so bad that we're trying to prevent people from being born with it. And
so one thing I'm kind of making up that might be your position, or might be the intuition that you're having, is if so from your perspective, I probably disagree, and we could get to this later, but from your perspective, the pre-screening thing before you're making embryos is significantly less bad ethically or morally than making embryos and then permanently freezing or destroying something.
Right, whatever is going to happen that they're not continuing on to.
And so if you're doing the thing that's worse, that sort of whatever effect it might have on so there's like the already existing people with Tay-Sachs or what have you. So both of these are like kind of aimed at I would say aimed at empowering parents, but either way they will certainly have the point is to have an effect which amounts to there being fewer people with Tay-Sachs in the next generation. And so that will have some effects on people with Tay-Sachs who are already living. But we could say, even if the effect is exactly the same, first of all, if we're going to a greater extreme, doing a more unethical or immoral act, like destroying embryos, on your view, if we're going to this greater extreme, first of all, you might have a larger effect. You might be decreasing the number of people with Tay-Sachs more, so it would have a larger effect. And second of all, you're more strongly affirming this value trade-off where you're saying Tay-Sachs is so bad that we should go to this greater extreme to avoid having kids with that condition.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of
sort of amplifies the.
Yeah, it kind of amplifies. And I think you could kind of like walk it all the way, right? Because we could like continue this whole thread, right? You can have like, okay, so we have preconception genetic screening on one side, all the way to like the Rehumanize protocol, where literally it's infanticide of infants. It's dreaded, but it's if a child is born with a condition that is life-limiting enough in the Netherlands, then you can have euthanasia of an infant. So you can say
today.
It's called the Rehumanize protocol, and it's basically saying that children with, and I think that has to be something that is like a truly life-limiting condition, not something that would just be a disability. But yes, that it is that the parents and the medical team can make the decision to euthanize the child. So we have that extreme on that end, and then again tying back into euthanasia generally. And so it's like when we're talking about disability and talking about valuing lives and talking about, do we just want to have carte blanche, like we don't do anything? I mean, that's what. I don't want to put words in my mouth, but I would say that's kind of the Catholic position of reproduction as being tied to, the unit of active sex, and like that is how it's designed, and anything outside of that is illicit. And that, answers those questions, right? You're equally valuing all life as it comes completely. But if we're saying like there are some conditions that are very detrimental to the person who has them, we want to try to limit them. It is a value judgment, but it's like, again, but then there comes to the means of executing that value judgment. I think there's a big difference between saying we're doing a preconception screening and actually literally euthanizing a baby, right? Like, I think that we can, like, just think about that. But it does come from the same general impulse of someone who has this life, who has this condition, their life maybe wouldn't be worth living. And so it's something to wrestle with there of, like, what are we really saying?
Part of what I wrestle with here is I'm confused why, you know, the Necker cube illusion, where it's sort of a line drawing of a cube and you can view it as being like out or in. You can like flip it either way. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So yeah, like I feel like that's happening where like we're staring at the same Necker cube, but then it's because like to me I'm sort of like, at least my intuition is just like, when I'm saying I want to empower parents to make genomic choices for their children, like what I'm thinking is the parents probably want their kids to be healthy, and then they'll want to decrease the risks of these diseases, and this is good because this is good because of just the general principle of we want everyone to be happy and healthy. Right. And so that there's that general principle, which means, first of all, we should, if we can do that with reprogenetics, we should, and we should use all sorts of other medical technology to alleviate suffering and maybe cure or treat people who have conditions currently. And it's all the same thing to me. And it's like, but then you could also view it exactly the opposite, where you're saying my life is less worth it, or yeah.
And I think it is like a very perspective thing. I think also it's, when it comes to this, one thing to highlight is it's like, are we looking at it from the perspective of the individual, the child that's created, versus the perspective of the parents? Because those two things aren't necessarily in alignment, kind of like what we talked about earlier with Elon Musk's kid, like how they would feel about being kind of created in this way, and how the people who are currently alive in this, living with the conditions, how they feel about it being talked about kind of outside of them. So that's one thing I would really suggest is, like, in making these decisions and having these conversations, like, talk to people who are living with them, talk to people who this is their life, and how they feel about
definitely. I definitely would like to do that.
Yeah, and you're going to get very different perspectives, right? Like, people have like all kinds of feelings about this, but like having them involved in the conversation, I think, is really important, because they're going to have a perspective that we from the outside really can't. And so I think it's good to have that. And then here's one other thing. This is very tangential, but I think it is important to the conversation, right? Because it gets into this a lot, especially in this community. So anytime you're talking about trying to increase traits, decrease traits, and intelligence, you're going to get into the autism community, right? Like, it's going to kind of crash smack dab into it. You have people who are what they call like Aspie supremacists, who think that it is the best thing in the world, that we should maximize intelligence and autism hand in hand and, go off in the future. You have people who are completely opposite. They're worried that this technology is going to be used to eliminate autistic people. You have, people in the middle but it is a real concern within that particular community. So I was questioning for you, like, have you gotten pushback? Have you like had any kind of conversation with people about that specifically, about how this is going to impact autism and the autistic community?
I don't think with that particular community. I've read some little bits of their writing. Writing by some autistic,
right, by autistic people
people. And I've thought about the general topic. I've talked to a couple trans friends about a similar thing, the similar situation. I've read a little bit about the deaf community and the blind community, where it's this interesting thing where, well, I didn't do like a real literature search, but I just saw this one thing where there's a blind like focus group. The researchers are having a focus group discussion with some blind people, and they're talking about using genetic testing, and they're like, we would never try to make our child blind, but we've heard that some people in the deaf community would, and that's so weird from our perspective. And I thought that was interesting. Where
I
help me
definitely
understand that
yeah.
there's
There's definitely different community dynamics, and there are some who feel like, specifically, I think deafness is like a big one, but also autism, where this is actually something that they don't consider necessarily disability. It's just a human difference, and has like entire like community elements to it that they think are, some of them, actually good. And the same with the autism community. There's definitely people who say that these are actually good things that we have that should be encouraged versus eliminated, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of try to address your question a little bit, like basically, my fundamental stance here is genomic emancipation, by which I mean, trying to think of how to compress this. I mean, basically, it's just using biotechnology to empower parents on behalf of their future children. So, really, ideally, it would be more of a self-creation thing, but that doesn't make sense. A child can't choose aspects of their genome before they exist. And parents are sort of for the most part, are sort of the next best thing, where we broadly assume parents have the best interest of their child in mind. And in particular, this implies genomic liberty, which I put forth sort of as like a social / like regulatory principle, which is supposed to basically restrict the restrictions. So restrict what a state should be allowed to regulate about genomic choices, to where I would say there should be basically there should be pretty broad protections for individual parents' right to choose aspects of their child's genome. It's like any principle, like freedom of speech or any other principle, it's not going to be absolute. You can't have parents doing horrible stuff, like whatever you can imagine, whatever.
Right.
But broadly, like certainly in terms of legal things, and even in terms of like how the technology should be rolled out in practice and how it's communicated about and presented and marketed, I would like it to be basically we're presenting you information, and we're potentially presenting you tools to intervene, but it's up to the parents how to think about what traits they do and don't want to affect, what trade-offs they want to make, whether to use the technology at all, of course. So it's not like so it's a little weird because, like, obviously I have a bunch of opinions about what traits are kind of like what I would want for my kids and what I expect other people do or should want in their kids. But in terms of what you actually do, it's about liberty.
Yeah, and I guess my question for you there, because we already kind of exist, this technology exists for a long time, is like just sex selection. But there's also like sex selective abortions, right? Like in some countries, there's a huge disparity between the number of expected female and males and what it actually is, because there are so many specifically female fetuses aborted, and then add this technology in, and you can specifically, like Elon Musk, select for male children. So what do you think
Also,
about it?
sorry, side note, sorry to interrupt. I'm so confused by that, honestly. I'm probably just missing something basic. Why do people, like, when I think of, I don't have kids, I would like to have kids. When I think about that, I'm like, I want to have like 3 girls and 3 boys, or whatever, just whatever mix happens randomly.
That's what I have. I think there's a lot of like cultural aspects to it, right? Like when it was in like China's one child policy, there were material benefits for that child to be a son versus a daughter. And then in some
like
cultures,
just average earning power, or
well, I think just like the way that like they could for earning power, but then also things related to like marriage, and like girls have dowries, and that's more of India than China, but and that the boys were able to like have the inheritance and things like that. Like things that are like old cultural things that still spill over. And in India specifically now today, it's very bad because of like that same issue where parents of daughters in India are like thinking about their daughters in a financial term, where if you're have limited finances, where a son is basically a financial benefit, whereas a daughter is a financial drain. Like you're making this as like economic thing based on cultural practices. So, and then in societies that are just like generally misogynistic, you might see a preference for male children versus female children because, sadly, like we do live in a world that is still misogynistic. So it like in terms of like how this plays out down the line, not well, right? Obviously, having too many men and not enough women is not good for society. It's a very bad balance. It's not great, and we're seeing that now, like happening because it's been going on for a good long time. But people could use this technology for that, right? Like they could say, I only want boys, and that's my preference, and that's actually a very like low level aspect. That's very easy to say, just boys versus girls. So if we're giving people just total liberty in doing that, then we're saying we're okay with these kind of misogynistic practices, and just kind of curious about your reflections on that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a good question, important question. So broadly, the category is sort of like free choice doesn't always have good outcomes, and in particular, kind of like correlated free choice across lots of people could have societally bad outcomes. Yeah, I mean, it is a problem. It is, as you say, it's already the case that it's not that hard to do that selection. So for the particular case of gender, there's not going to be there's not going to be much of a technological change necessarily. Well, okay, I suppose if you have in vitro gametogenesis, that makes embryos more abundant, and therefore, if it's in vitro oogenesis, that doesn't change the sex ratio. No, but yeah, it makes embryos more abundant, and therefore easier to select for gender or anything. Okay, so that's a technological change. Just socially or economically, if the technology is used more widely, then more people will be doing IVF anyway. So more people would have it would be easy to also do sex selection. Sorry, I'm not addressing the question. Let's see.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I mean, okay, I can say my current thinking on this. It's not very helpful or insightful, but that's my current thinking, is basically in terms of legal state restrictions, I'm still against most state restrictions. It just seems like something I don't want the government involved in any more than absolutely necessary. The practical vision, as far as I have it currently, would be something like you kind of have guidelines that are softer than government restrictions, but are not absolute, but that are kind of in practice. I don't know. Yeah, I haven't thought about this in great detail. Basically what I'm saying is the clinics should discourage people from doing sex selection unless there's some sort of okay, the best version to me would be there's a bunch of work put into every individual couple. They talk to the counselor a lot and think through the things a lot, and the counselor is do you really want to do this sex selection thing? What's your reason? I will, the company will provide this service if you really want, but we recommend it against it. Or maybe many clinics would not provide that service at all. Another example in this class of sex selection is selection for height. People want tall sons because of advantages for being tall as a male, and it's basically just a zero-sum thing. It doesn't if everyone's 1 inch, if everyone's sons are 1 inch taller, that doesn't help anyone. It probably makes things worse, especially if you do 3 inches taller. That you're gonna just have more health problems with no total benefit to anyone. But the individual incentives are potentially significant. So what do you do with that? I don't have a great answer.
Yeah,
unfortunately. So that's a
no,
open
it's
question.
good. No, I'm glad that we're talking about it honestly. And I will say that's a big problem within the IVF industry generally is the regulatory thing, because there's actually a lot of donor conceived people and even parents who've used IVF pushing for more regulation, and then the IVF industry saying, no, we don't need these regulations. So there's a tension, right? Because again, the IVF industry as industry has financial incentive to like make things as easy as possible for as many people as we want it. And like, you want to do this, we've gotcha. But then the people who are then living with those consequences now, 20 years later, are like, ooh, we need to make some changes here because this is actually affecting like real people who are dealing with these fallouts. So that's an interesting thing, is that like now these people who were born from this technology are old enough to be advocating for changes to how it's done. And a lot of them are just saying, like you said, like they want more regulation. They want it to be something that has a more transparency, more honesty. A big problem in the IVF industry is like records magically going lost. That's like a joke that, oh, your donor's records were lost in a fire. Just so many fires happening in these sperm donor clinics. It really should be looked into.
Why are records being lost?
Because they don't want to admit that they have used, the same donor 300 times. And so then a kid comes and is like, hey, I need medical records from my father's side because I have this genetic condition and I would like to know if it's, a familial thing. And they're like, oh, we don't have those records. They were lost. And so now it's like how they're finding each other is through 23andMe, that kind of thing. They do a genetic test and then they get linked up and they say, here's your 14 siblings, and they find each other in Facebook groups. It's all very millennial dystopian. And then they find through their siblings, oh, you also have this, familial migraines. Yep, me too. We apparently got it from our mysterious father who we can't actually identify, but, we think might be related to this family tree. So regulation, bottom line though, that was long aside, regulation isn't happening like it should be now. And so if we're adding on top of it, like these things that we're trying to push people towards in terms of, any kind of genetic screening, like the foundation isn't there. Like the clinics are just happy to do whatever you ask, basically. So that's something to consider, is that while your ideal client in this situation would be a couple or individual who has only the best of intentions for their children, and they're just wanting to, make sure that they don't have like this, we have a family history of diabetes and I would rather my child doesn't have diabetes, like that's like reasonable thing. You also have to account for the people who don't have those kind of intentions and who have weird incentives and weird intentions, and how do you prevent them from abusing technology, even if you're not like, again, doing it in a way that destroys any lives at the fetal level. You don't want to destroy their lives as adults either, the people who are created here. So that's also something to consider.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in my head it is. Yeah. It's like an open question, ongoing thinking. I mean, that thing with the IVF clinics losing records sounds pretty weird. It seems like that should be regulated. I think I've heard some of the leaders of the current embryo screening industry saying basically that they're in favor of regulation, of significant regulation. Like, for example, a big thing is regulating claims about polygenic scores. So if a company says we can predict your child's diabetes risk or IQ or whatever with this accuracy, or we can increase the expected value of these traits by some amount, this should be like tested, verified, or invalidated by a third party. Fraud. There should be fraud regulations, not allowing you to misrepresent things. Yeah.
Yeah, because you get right.
As another framing thing about how I think about these things, I don't know if you might not like this, but I'm curious what you think of this. Is two things. So number one, like in the background for me in all of these discussions is like, there's all sorts of issues that we've been getting into, but I don't want to for myself and for the conversation, I don't want to lose sight of like there's just really, really big basic benefits. Like the central, most obvious thing is just there can be a whole lot less involuntary disease, and like if we can leave aside the not to discard this issue as it were, but leaving aside the issue of discarding embryos, like if we imagine the hypothetical where you have technology that isn't discarding embryos, there's all these issues, and people could be some groups could be negatively affected, etc. But you're decreasing like hundreds of thousands or millions of conditions that make people's lives worse, increase suffering, make premature death and disability. And this is just a really, really large potential benefit. So I don't want to lose sight of that. And also, I think, like, we haven't really discussed IQ too much, and there's a whole lot of caveats which are not pro forma. I agree with the caveats, but with those caveats assumed, like, I do think that cognitive capacity matters. Like, I mean, it's pretty awkward to talk about, but I have a reasonably, capable brain, and I appreciate this. There's lots of things that I'm not good at cognitively, but for the things I am good at, I appreciate this. It helps me, pursue my goals. It helps me. It's edifying to be able to understand the world, and I want to be able to help other people by whatever intellectual output I can produce. And if I could produce more, I would want to help other people, if nothing else. And I just think it's like both of those things, decreasing diseases and increasing human capacity, are just really, really big potential benefits.
Yeah. And I think that they are. Like, I mean, obviously, like, there are benefits, right? Like, I don't think that anyone is inside the debate is like thinking that it's something that's just like nefarious purposes and like is like you said, like going back to like eugenics and these kind of things. I think that at the root of it, most people who are talking about this do have good intentions and are trying to do something to improve the world, and are not like, if you ask them and drill down, are not bigoted towards anyone and would be horrified by a lot of the things that would horrify people on both sides of the thing. I think that's completely reasonable. But it's like,
but beyond just the intentions, it's also like when we're doing the calculus, like when we're trying to figure out how to deal with this technology, we have to we can't like discount the benefits,
right? The impact, yeah. And I guess that's what I was going to say is it's like it's kind of impossible to not talk about things in utilitarian, dynamics, even if you're trying not to be. Like, I try really hard not to just be a consequentialist, but it does, like, you get into things, it's like it's there. So like going into sort of like a utilitarian calculation for all of this is that a lot of things do have trade-offs, right? And it's like we're making a value judgment. Like, if you're making a value judgment, we want to increase intellectual capacity. Like, we think that is a good thing, and I would probably agree with you there. But I do think that there are things tied to increased intellectual capacity that are probably, most people would say, not so great. I think that it'd be very hard to generally nudge the average IQ up with also nudging kind of a existential dread that comes with being a more intelligent person that's thinking about the world more deeply. I don't know many very intelligent people who don't struggle at least a little bit with those kind of issues. And I think that they are, I mean, not to say, I'm sure there's somebody out there who is just like a super genius and he's just so happy with the world, but they tend to, run together. And so it's like when we balance one thing, when we make a determination on something like that, like, again, there's some that are just straight up and down. Like, if we eliminate diabetes, like, that's just a net benefit. Nobody is like pro-diabetes, right? Like, we're happy that we've done this. But on the things that are a little bit more ephemeral, like your intelligence, your even things that we maybe as a society qualify as good but are actually neutral, like you said, like with the height, is this becoming a zero-sum game? If with physical features, which we feel very uncomfortable talking about, but parents specifically, have very strong preferences for. So it's like, what are we going toward? What is our goal at the end state of this? And what trade-offs are we making if we accept that we are doing this?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, there's this sort of, at least a double question, where if you're asking me, like, what's my moral advice to a particular couple, then I'm saying all sorts of detailed things like decrease risks of various diseases, increase intelligence, blah, blah, blah. If we're saying, if there's like a simple goal, then to me it's mainly like the genomic emancipation thing, which is empowering parents, and then there isn't, at least in the short term, there isn't a unified goal. There isn't a unified, like, concrete goal in terms of, like, here's the traits. It's like people sometimes ask, like, well, okay, you have this technology, but then who decides what's a good trait or not? And I'm like, no one. No one decides for everyone what the good trait is. It's the parents. If you're asking what's the longer term, like, why is genomic emancipation good, or where are we going in the longer term, then I'm saying, like, I guess I am saying something sort of radical in the etymological sense, like radical meaning to the root. It's radical, the word is cognate with radish, like the root vegetable, and also the word root. So radical means to the root. So I'm saying something that is trying to go to the root of what it means to be human, which is, in the long term, cautiously, slowly, with reflection and wisdom. The way I view things, we do want to have increasing self-sovereignty, and I want to caveat, or try to frame this and say, I don't think that this should be in conflict with God or with humility. It might sound like it is, and there's tension there. I don't think it is. Has to be in conflict with those things. But self-sovereignty, meaning slowly, with intention and wisdom, self-transforming and kind of taking more and more, I'm struggling to not say control, but taking more and more control over who we are and what our future is, which includes changing how our mind works, slowly, with wisdom and caution, and taking a very long time. So that's sort of the very long-term philosophy.
The long-term. So I guess my question is, like, I think we have already, like, been down that path, right? Just like through natural evolution, right? We're taller, the average IQ tends to be going up. We're kind of struggling with it now, but, like, over time, like, our intellectual capacity, our health, like, all of these things tend to be towards stronger, healthier, smarter people, just like across the board, and various degrees across various places. But I guess so this is like an acceleration of that trend, and I guess my question to you is, like, why do you think that we need to accelerate it artificially versus just let there be, like, this kind of natural evolution towards a better future?
Well, really, a main thing. Well, my main real response would just come down to sort of more concrete facts about which will look sort of utilitarian. I'm not committed, like, totalitarian about utilitarianism by any means, but I do think it is very relevant, and I think if you just look at the likely facts insofar as we can guess them, just accelerating somewhat now seems just good. Like, we can probably decrease a lot of disease risks, increase capacity, and it should be fairly safe given a list of scientific developments to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic answer is just, it looks like it would have good effects and shouldn't be immoral or unethical or have too huge of negative effects. A different answer would be, sorry, what was I going to say? Why now? I forgot what I was going to say, so you go ahead.
That's okay. I'll give you another question, and I'm sure we'll give you a jumping off point. So, like, but do worry, because this is one of my big concerns with this, is like having a stratification effect where we have a group of people who are using this technology, who are, like gradually but over generations increasing their, intelligence and whatever else we're optimizing for. And then a group of people who are not. And the people who are not, what is like the future looking like for them? Again, it goes into like the moral imperative, but also just like practical existence. If we have made it, instead of, a bell curve, we have like two little mounds. Like, what is that reality going to be for the people living it?
So there's a couple different types of responses. One is what will likely happen. 2 is what we should be aiming for to happen. And then 3 is how do you deal with those worlds? Mm-hmm. So what I think likely, so certainly at the moment, as you mentioned a while ago, the technology is just not that powerful. You actually can get significant decreases in absolute disease risk, and the reason for that is kind of the quantile. Like if you're in the 80% of low diabetes risk, that might be like you've cut the absolute risk in half or something. That's a made-up number, but you can have pretty large effects. Mm-hmm. You can have pretty large effects from the first like 1 or 2 standard deviations of like percentile risk can mm-hmm. decrease the absolute risk quite significantly just because of the way that the hazard ratios work. But mm-hmm. certainly in terms of a quantitative trait like IQ or height, as you mentioned, the effects are pretty small. They're probably noticeable already, but they might be something like in expectation, an increase of like 4 IQ points or 6 IQ points. Mm-hmm. Some people's claims go up to like 8 IQ points, depending on how many embryos you have. So those are noticeable and significant, but not like huge. In mm-hmm. particular, you're definitely not going to get 2 mounds.
Right.
Like you were describing, like you have the current like approximately normal distribution, and then if someone had a really strong version of the technology, you would have like this other bump. That's definitely not the case now at all, mm-hmm. for 2 reasons. First of all, as I just said, the mean, the average, is being shifted by a pretty small amount. So you have like 2 curves that are pretty close in their average. And second of all, it is like this rather than like this. In other words, there's the approximately normal distribution of the population at large, and then there's parents who are using reprogenetic technology. The distribution of the, let's say IQs, of the kids who are coming from reprogenetics, the distribution has basically the same variance. Mm-hmm. So it's also very spread out, which means you basically can't distinguish them. If that makes sense. You might get effects, I guess, now that I think about it, where I'm not sure what happens at the tails. It would actually depend on the numbers involved. You might get effects where like half of the Nobel Prize winners are.
That's kind of what I was thinking, is at the very end, like if we, and again, like probably multiple generations here that it's like, cumulatively happening, but like if you're at this very high end, which I think, being honest, is what people are trying to like push their kids for, right? Especially people who are like interested in that aspect of technology. They're probably themselves at a level where they're expecting that their children are also going to be at least at their, level of attainment. And so they're like trying to push out towards the end, give them.
Yeah, actually. Okay. So I want to actually back up and clarify, because you asked me a good pointed question. I kind of rambled on something that wasn't quite you asked about stratification and you asked about like the bimodal thing. And I started talking about like what the current technology can do, but I want to clarify. I do take a somewhat extreme position here. I am sort of provisionally, but I'm pretty sure this is my opinion. I am in favor of basically pushing as hard as we can, as fast as we can, within bounds of safety, within bounds of safety, which takes various forms. But yeah, and I'll say a couple points about that if that's okay, and then we can go back and revisit them as you see fit. So, like if my technical aims were achieved immediately, that would and if parents made choices like this, that would create a noticeably bimodal. Well, it really depends on what the parents choose. I think many parents would not choose to go to the end. They would choose to maybe increase a little bit or somewhat or whatever.
Right.
But there could very plausibly be a bimodal thing or just a range of where kids resulting from reprogenetics would be very overrepresented. And so that's a big societal issue potentially. But a few things that I would want to say. So first of all, right now there is a cognitive elite, but it's kind of determined by genetic randomness. It's determined by assortative mating, which is much more of a slightly creepy kind of stratification type thing to me, and also determined by parental like investment of like, can I pay for like tutors and all the best education and all the best nutrition and medical care versus if I'm poor and I'm working 2 jobs and I don't read to you that much because I'm busy. And so the current situation is there is a cognitive elite and it's not equally distributed. It's sort of random or a stratification. There's also a current power elite, like political power. And this is maybe is controversial, but I don't really think that it super duper. It probably overlaps significantly with like intelligence in general, but it comes apart at the tails. It doesn't really seem like the most elite, like the most elite intellectuals I think are more like your sort of high performing like academics, like science researchers, teachers. You've got like, engineers, creative artists, writers, thinkers, philosophers, these sorts of people. And then the power elite is sort of people who are charismatic or good at, or maybe a little sociopathic, like good at playing power games, which is a cognitive task, but like, I'm making this up, but it seems like it's less G-loaded, IQ loaded. I'm making that up, but...
no, I think that's fairly reasonable. I mean, if you look at elite institutions, right? Like you have people who are there because they are extraordinarily smart, and you have people who are there because they have extraordinary connections. And they are probably minimally intelligent, right, to succeed there. I don't think you can just like rely completely on your name. You have to have a base level of, like above average intelligence, but not necessarily the extreme outlier that you would with someone who comes through it because of their purely, merit versus connections.
And then so on the other hand, if we imagine this world with what I would call strong reprogenetics, it definitely would have issues, potentially quite large ones. But like in terms of stratification, like I mean, basically what I would say is it's more democratic by a long shot than the current status quo, and number 2, it's much less zero sum. So assortative mating, for example, is pretty zero sum in a sense. Like, I mean, not that people shouldn't do assortative mating. Like, obviously, you should find a mate who you like being with, you're compatible, you want to see more of them in the world, and that's like a personal preference thing. So obviously, you should do that. But insofar as there are Well, any trait really is okay. I guess I'm beating around the bush because this is uncomfortable to say, but
confidently, I got you.
There's only so many smart people or genes to go around or something. If we're talking about assortative mating, I don't want to imply whatever. But then with reprogenetics, that's just not true anymore. Basically, more or less any couple can the stronger the technology is, the more any couple can have access, as it were, to genes that will help their kid be long-lived, healthy, happy, capable. What do you think of that?
So I guess like two things. One, I think there is always going to still be like the economic element to that. Like if someone is very, very poor, this technology is probably going to be out of reach for quite some time versus someone who is, even middle class or obviously wealthy. Like the very wealthy are going to have access the fastest, and then it kind of trickles down through, insurance coverage and, 401k things. Like there is an access element there, which I think that, can't be overlooked, that the people who are currently disadvantaged in the system that exists today are going to probably continue to be disadvantaged in this future system because they're just, do not have the resources to do this. So I think that's one element. And then the second thing that we didn't really touch on because I kind of glazed over in the beginning, just like with the embryo situation and all of that, is I know that, right now we are limited. How many eggs a woman can have to create embryos is, limited to a fairly low number, honestly. Like, we maybe like 15 or something at a time is probably like the upper end of that. But with some of the technology, especially if we are using skin cells to create egg cells and like things like it's a very layman's term, but understand what I'm saying. You could potentially create many, many, many more eggs. You could create, again, from my ethically suspect's position, you could create a bunch of embryos, but you could, maybe like test the eggs only and discard something that we, wouldn't be as ethically compromised. But you would have the ability on a much larger scale than what exists right now in terms of just the number of possibilities. Because right now we're talking of you're picking the best 1 out of 10 embryos or something like that. But in this future scenario, it could be the best 1 out of 1,000 eggs, or the best, something like that is kind of what we're talking about just in terms of scale. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong about that. That's kind of my understanding.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, again, there's like other pathways of technology that could lead to no discarded embryos, but but the future you paint is a plausible one, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So my point is like basically just like the it would be able to find like a needle in a haystack situation is kind of what we're going for here. So like if you're a potential parent who is looking for the embryo with like the best possible combination of genes, and we've also like done some editing to put in or take out some things that we want, this is a situation where you could potentially end up with an embryo who is very far outside of the bands of what you and your partner would just naturally create, I guess, is kind of the future we're envisioning here. Like, it's not just the small bump anymore. If we got to that level, it would be a pretty substantial shift between, I guess, genetic potential and like the actual child that you ended up with.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually just thinking of it in terms of 1 in 1,000 is actually just a reasonable, like we can convert that into SDs, standard deviations, like on a normal distribution, or equivalently, we could convert it to IQ points or disease risk quantiles, whatever. But I think that just thinking of it in terms of 1 in 1,000 is like a reasonable intuitive summary where it's like, that's how much we've like affected the genome of the child. It's a 1 in 1,000 genome.
Okay. Which is interesting because that does make a much bigger shift than like, again, current technology is like you're getting kind of the best of your potential with maybe a little bit around the edges that have been, shifted, but we're really talking about something that's far beyond just what you and your partner would be able to naturally expect. Just through
it's sort of natural in a quantitative way where it's like 1 in 10 is basically natural. Right. 1 in 100 is, I guess you could say, quantitatively less natural, and then so on for 1,000. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if you're implying natural, like, because natural is not necessarily good on my view, but.
No, but I'm just saying that, like, when we're trying to look at the effects of what this could be, like, it's just the effect of it could be like much beyond just what we're currently experiencing. And you could also be raising a child then, which is also something interesting, because I can tell you, having gifted children, raising a child that is gifted at this level is also an interesting experience for parents that they might not be thinking of, prepared for. But that's something that, if we are creating this whole generation of children who are so kind of far beyond their parents capabilities and experiences, like, that's another thing that is going to have to be played into.
And you know what, I just thought of I'm being a little cute, I guess, but to apply this, we were discussing the logic of people with a particular condition, such as a disease, them being underserved as a community if there's not very many of them. I would say currently that the status quo is that this applies to extremely gifted children. And I would say it's actually a good thing if there's sort of more motivation and resources going into the question of how do you raise gifted children.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it also, again, like, I don't want to harp on this too much, but also when you have extreme giftedness, a lot of times that does come with, like, twice exceptionalities, like autism, like ADHD, these things, which maybe hypothetically we could figure out how to not be linked together, but seem pretty strongly linked together. And so I think that would be another aspect of, like...
Yeah, I'm confused because this intuition is very widespread, and I generally tend to not super discount kind of intuitions or anecdotes. But on the other hand, from what I've seen of the data, there's basically very little correlation between measured IQ and any of these traits. Traits except for autism. There's a non-trivial correlation, but it's quite small. It's 0.2 or something, which is the number I've seen. But the correlation between IQ and autism, although I don't know exactly what trait.
What they're exactly looking at for autism, right? Yeah. I think the ones that I feel like autism, ADHD have their correlations to each other, which I think kind of like pulls it in. At least I have full disclosure here. My oldest son's autistic, and but literally his insurance company is like, "Have you screened for ADHD too?" Because oftentimes, I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, obviously, knowing him as a human being, like, yes, but there's also schizophrenia that kind of comes into circles generally with families of high intelligence. That
again, I'm confused because people have this impression pretty persistently, but again, the data that I've seen says that's not true either genetically or just in terms of measurement. I haven't investigated this, so I'm not. Yeah, that's right.
But those are kind of the things. Yeah, but I guess it's like, for a lot of parents, I'll tell you this just from, like, being involved with, like, parents with gifted children, is that there often is a element of spiky profiles, I'd say, where they have very, very high highs, but then have things that they are below what you would expect for someone of their age in different elements. So, like, you might have, I'll just use my son for example. He's autistic, he's hyperlexic, so he literally taught himself to read when he was 2. Like, fabulous, great job, Holden, but could not deal with, having his cup move because of, like, the autistic persistent stuff. So there was, like, the element of the very high IQ, which not necessarily tied to the autism, but those two things, like hyperlexia specifically and IQ, are, like, pretty linked. But obviously a normal school, going all the way back, normal school did not know how to deal with that at all. And so when you talk about just gifted children generally, it's a struggle. But then when you talk about gifted children who also might have sort of splinter disabilities, maybe things that we're not necessarily calculating for, but that kind of travel together, it's another kind of support system that is not currently existing and would probably be more necessary in a world with more of those children than right now. So
yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Yeah, I mean, this is a fairly generic comment, but yeah, I mean, of course, I would certainly support more resources and thinking going into really any kind of child who's underserved by the current system. But I guess I should really just investigate this more offline. But I'll just note that, like, yeah, I'm pretty uncertain what's going on here with these impressions where, like, it's plausible to me that, like, as you mentioned, I think that some of these sort of the second exceptionality might not be measured well. It also might be fairly rare and therefore kind of not really show up very much in the correlations, because the correlations will be affected by, like, the most common, like, if you're slightly autistic or if you're slightly more likely to be diagnosed with whatever version of autism they were measuring, if you're, like, slightly above average intelligence, that would affect the correlation much more than, like, well, if you're 3 or 4 standard deviations above average on intelligence, maybe that makes it much more likely for you to have some other condition, but that doesn't really show up in the correlation. That could be the case. I don't know.
Yeah, and I'll say too, one thing that I've noticed, again, not like scientific studies or anything like that at all, but I do wonder when it comes to autism specifically, and, you know, like high IQ and these kind of things, it's also looking at, like, how people are diagnosed. And I think that, you know, we're getting into a place with autism diagnosis as being more common and frequent, but you have people who in the past who would be diagnosed with autism but, like, weren't until very old. Like, I'll give you an example of my uncle who was extraordinarily intelligent, who, you sound like such an asshole saying this, I'm so sorry. He, like, got irritated with, like, the Mensa people because he was like, there's just a bunch of like, he joined and then hated them, you know, like that kind of person. And then when he was, like, almost 70, was like, you know, I think I might have a bit of that autism, and, like, actually went and pursued a diagnosis and was told, yes, obviously, Ronald, you are extraordinarily autistic. But he didn't get that diagnosis until he was 70, and only because I think his son was like, Dad, like, you need to do this. And so I'm curious how many of those types exist that just, you know, like, were missed because of their generation and that sort of thing. So, like, as we're getting into, like, people who are more frequently getting diagnoses earlier in their lives, if that will shift at all. Just from, again, like, seeing people within groups of gifted children, it seems like very prominently diagnosed. But I also, this is controversial, I don't know, this might get me in trouble. Also, I have seen some people say, like, are we calling, you know, extreme giftedness autism because of some overlapping things, but they're not actually, like, we're attaching that label to giftedness, and it's not actually the same thing. It's not, the condition we're calling autism isn't actually autism in a sense of, like, how it's generally understood when it is attached to, like, repetitive thinking and things like this and very gifted people. I've seen some of that.
Wait, I don't want to get you in more trouble than you already are, but I'm not sure I understood you saying something. Are you saying, like, if you're very smart, then just by being smart, you tend to, like, hyper focus on one thing for 2 hours, and then people say, "Oh, that's autistic." Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So, is that actually autism in, like, a diagnosable sense? Maybe being diagnosed, but is it, like, what we mean when we say, like, you have, like, there's some thoughts around that in some of the groups. So, anyways, that's a long aside, but I do think it's something, like, got dragged into the weird mom blog shit. But there is, like,
no, this is great. Yeah, keep going.
But it's something to think about, like, when we are optimizing for anything, right? That there are, like, second order impacts, and autism or not, just putting that to the side, there's also an element of, like, how relatable you find other people, how well you're able to, like, interact in the world, and, you know, these kind of things. And it's also something with very high IQs that is sometimes more challenging. And I guess if we're creating a whole cohort of people who are like this, maybe not as much, but, like, just generally, that's something that a lot of people who are very intelligent kind of struggle with already, is, like, that social aspect. So are we then, I don't know, making this harder for people and creating kind of a, not disability exactly, but creating a hardship there that maybe wouldn't have otherwise existed.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess I might be becoming a broken record, but like, basically, for this particular question, and then for all sorts of similar questions, I'm going to say, yes, that's a significant risk. There could be effects like that very plausibly, but the benefits are big. Like personally, I would say I had noticeable trouble in various social contexts. Maybe that's a personality thing rather than an intelligence thing, but either way, it makes sense to me. But I wouldn't, like, if it is related to some capability that I have, I don't think I would prefer to not have the capability. I would say that the benefit to me personally and the benefit to me being able to help other people through my intellectual work, insofar as I have, that's like worth it to me already. And then I would want to kind of like that's another important problem to be solved, but it probably can be solved or alleviated. Like there could be better social context, better social technology for, like, in the same way that any exceptional kid, in whatever way, if you know what dyslexia is, and you have experience helping other kids with dyslexia, you can probably help a given kid with dyslexia much more than a totally unprepared, unaware, low-resourced, just random teacher at a school through no particular fault of their own. It's just like there's work that has to be done. There's like social technology that has to be invented.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that I was talking to my husband about this before we went on. And again, full disclosure, like he works in education, so this is of interest to him. But it's how do you teach kids if you have, a system where you have suddenly all of these extraordinarily intelligent children, and you want to actually make it so that this intelligence is useful, I guess. I don't like talking like that, but like you want them to be successful and have like the ability to improve the world as a result of these gifts that they have. Our current system is not very good for a lot of kids, right? Like, well, our education system in this country is not great for all these reasons. Private schools, some good, some bad. There's all like it's not a systemized thing where we can say, okay, we know how we're going to educate these children, and so it's sort. If they just come into existence and all of a sudden in 5 years, all these kindergarten teachers across the country have these little geniuses in their class, or whenever it happens, I really like. Are we prepared to deal with that? And if we would you want like special schools? And then again, if we do have like special schools for special kids, are we doing the same thing where we're lifting, like to use the Claire in the Sun language, like are we lifting some where like everyone else is kind of in this, I don't know, quagmire down here? And how does that look for society? I just kind of keep going back to like, what on a social level are we doing? Because on the individual level, everything like, it makes sense. Like you want your children to not have diseases. You don't want them to be, have the best chance, like all these things. But then you take it out to this social level and it's like, okay, but in practice, like what is that going to look like for us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't have a ready-made good answer. Yeah, I mean, I guess the straightforward things are more social technology and educational, like methodology, for these kids in general is good. I broadly, there's definitely a tension between sort of just having everyone be together regardless of whether they used some assisted reproductive technology or not, versus, as you're saying, you might want to have a school that's specialized for these sorts of kids. I mean, I don't think it would ever actually fall on the lines of who used reprogenetic technology, it would be just, which kids would be well served by this, and that will always be a mix of.
Right.
But but there's a tension there where even having such a school at all raises these questions. I mean, one thing to note is that I've heard that you can get so there are benefits to having very gifted children be educated with other very gifted children, presumably both because you have they have peers that sort of interact with them more like where they are, if that makes sense, and then also just in terms of like the pacing of a classroom, where if a kid is learning much faster, like it could be 2 or 3 times as fast as measured by like weeks or years of schooling or like a curriculum, it makes more sense to have kids who are going broadly at the same rate and who are at broadly the same level. So the thing I've heard is sort of the best solution for that is to have kids be with similarly gifted kids. But a sort of second best solution is to have kids grouped with older kids who are less gifted. Sorry, I don't like the language here, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand. Like, you're either, like, and it's kind of like what we see in schools right now, right? Like, you can raise kids above, like, have them skip grade levels, or you can have a gifted and talented program that keeps them in their same age cohort, but is, accelerated, or however the school chooses to do that. And, yeah, and then we have that system built. I know it's somewhat controversial. I know in some places they're like, oh, we should end our gifted and talented programs. That's kind of been a hot button issue, which we did not take a stance on at Rehumanize International, I can tell you that. But but it is a question, when it comes to, okay, what are we actually, like, how are these kids being raised? What are they doing? And, yeah, there's so many things that when it comes to our public policy and that sort of thing, that, again, right now as it stands is just not great, not serving people very well in like our world now. And so I'm curious how adding on this additional layer is going to interact with those already kind of broken systems. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I expect to actually happen if this technology were applied somewhat widely, like if a lot of parents were choosing to use reprogenetics, then, I mean, basically what I expect to happen is a big mix of things, and there would be a lot of things would not go as well as they could or should, but people would kind of figure it out in the long run, basically. Like, you would have some people doing homeschooling, you would have some people doing small, like community schools, not necessarily with other super gifted kids, but just with their friends. Just because, as you're saying, there's a lot of ways that various aspects of current educational systems are failing or underserving various groups of kids. So, like, I have friends who do their own little like micro schools, tinkering with. I mean, they're not genetically engineered super geniuses or whatever. They're just people who really care about their kids and have enough slack in their lives to put in significant effort into doing something off the standard path. So they're just tinkering with different structures of education. And then you'll also have lots of kids who are in whatever public or private schools, and that will be difficult. I mean, personally, I was lucky to have parents. So I was like pretty advanced in math in elementary school, and I was very lucky and grateful to have parents who persistently were like, let's, they talked to the school like, can we give Tsvi some enrichment in math? And the school's like, okay, well, we'll have him do some half-assed thing, and my parents were like, no, this is not sufficient. Let's figure out something more. And then, so I got to be quite significantly accelerated in math, just because my parents cared and pushed, and it was a small school and could scrape together enough resources to, well, it was different for different years. Well, for some of the years I kind of just like sat in the computer lab alone looking at like CDs teaching calculus, which was fun, which was good. That was good.
You would have
and
loved
so,
Beast Academy. You would have been so like the art of problem solving. They have a kids curriculum. Are you familiar?
Wait, love what? I didn't hear what you said.
Beast Academy. It's
Beast Academy.
Are you familiar with the art of problem solving? They do like the curriculum to prep for like the math contest and that sort of thing. They have an elementary curriculum that is for advanced math kids, and little baby you would have been been very happy. Just an aside, not a plug for art of problem solving, although we do love them. But anyways, yeah, I mean schools, they try to do things. I know my husband, they like had a little bus from the elementary to the high school, and they take him and his two nerdy friends over to learn French or something. Like they try, right? And no shame in that it is difficult. That's what I'm talking about, because it's a challenge. But that brings me to something that I know that you have like a lot of experience in and like concern about, but I think it is important when we start talking about all of this and haven't even addressed it at all, which is like the AI and the role of AI and these kind of things. Because from the educational perspective, like nice little transition here is obviously that's something that is a resource now that wasn't a resource when we were children, but would be a resource for these children growing up, as you could have, the Young Ladies Illustrated Primer could be real. They could do something like that. So do you think that because of the potential for AI, we could just like solve the problem there? Or do you think that we're actually going to be creating more problems that then these children are going to be up against? Like kind of what are you thinking in terms of how AI is going to influence the world that we're imagining here?
I don't know if I don't know if I actually have that much insightful to say. Really my focus has been on this somewhat more future technology where we actually have AIs that are like independently thinking more effectively than humans, like smarter than humans, and how that's sort of like extremely, extremely dangerous, like less social problems and harming kids in some way, and more it figures out how to kill everyone and then kills everyone.
Instead of, going like launching all the nukes at us situation.
Something like that. But I can try to address your question. I mean, it just might not be very insightful, but I do think that I do think there's like there's maybe a significant potential for basically I think just mastery learning. So mastery learning and like having attention put on you is pretty helpful. So just for the audience, like mastery learning refers to the notion that if there's like a curriculum of subjects where there's dependencies, where like you don't really want to try to learn multiplication before you learn addition, you don't want to try to solve simple algebraic equations before you have learned multiplication and addition, you don't want to try to learn calculus before you can solve linear and quadratic equations, etc. There's sort of sequential interdependencies, and if you try to skip a step, you get confused, you don't understand the next step, you fall behind, and you struggle. Maybe you can squeak by kind of pretending to understand the next step, then you go to the next step and you don't really understand both of the previous steps, and it's just bad. So mastery learning refers to the idea of sticking with a particular topic and not trying to over advance until you actually understand it. And so that's an issue in like a classroom where the teacher has very limited attention, like even in the sort of school that like a wealthier person might send their kid to, or just a smaller school. you still might have 10 kids in the classroom. That's a very good ratio relative to, other ratios could be 20, 30, 40, 50 kids to a teacher. But even if it's 10 to 1, the teacher can't be having 10 different tracks of curriculum for the 10 different micro rates at which different kids understand different things. So mastery learning is is pretty difficult in that context. If you have individualized tutors, even if it's AI, which is going to be worse than a human teacher, even if it's AI, it's potentially quite enabling for doing a sort of mastery learning type thing. You don't necessarily, I don't know if you really need it. I don't know too much. I mean, maybe just like having an automated curriculum like the Khan Academy or maybe the Beast Academy that you were saying, maybe having these programmed curricula is already good enough. I don't know. But, and then, so there's mastery learning, and then separately there's just having kind of tailored explanations at scale, like very cheaply, where you don't need to have where a kid can have questions answered or problems checked or addressed by a large language model at scale, very inexpensively. You asked about problems. I would say there's quite definitely potential for a lot of problems there where I think you do need attention from a human who understands human ways of thinking and can understand idiosyncratic, like kids can have all sorts of very specialized, very idiosyncratic, like creative misunderstandings that you want to understand well, so you can really address them, and maybe do something even more subtle and also very context specific, like not just tell the kid what they're doing wrong or just tell them how to do it right, but also help them learn like meta skills, like learning skills, where it's like, for example, trying to help them notice where things are going wrong and prompt them to investigate for themselves how they're thinking about it, or how they are supposed to be thinking about it, or how it's correct to think about it. So if you're replacing that sort of attention from a teacher or a parent or whoever, that would be quite bad. But yeah.
Yeah. So I guess like still on the AI thing, but more towards like where your wheelhouse is like you're talking about creating this world for these children, right? But they're going to inhabit the world that we're currently barreling towards with AI, kind of this largely unregulated behemoth of various, abilities and various actors and all these different corporations. Like there's a lot going on in the AI world. People are at different levels and kind of careening towards a cliff. If in my view of like, if we hit this cliff of actual real reasoning, or however we want to, I know people talk about it in different ways, but that world exists, right? If we have a truly autonomous AI in the world, and then we are having like all these like optimized children in this world, like we've created kind of again like this like sort of sci-fi dystopian thing, but with some intentionality that they're going to be there. I don't know, just like I feel like this probably plays a lot in like your thinking because that is your background. So I guess like what are you imagining will be the outcome of all of this?
Okay, I'm not totally sure I understood the question. I'll try to
just like these kids in this AI world where we have like, post singularity world, like, are you anticipating that they're going to be able to somehow like prevent catastrophe, or like, are you thinking they're just going to be living in this like, whatever, we're all like enslaved to the AI overlords? Like what's kind of, I don't know, like what are we envisioning here? Like what kind of world are we thinking about building and with what we have going on?
So a quick preface is that so I want reprogenetics to be part of genomic emancipation, which means emancipating, in particular, children. So I advise against, and I will not do myself, things like pressuring kids into particular life paths or sort of like overly trying to have train tracks for kids' life paths. So in particular, I'm not like, these kids are going to be drafted into fighting the AI.
Yeah, drafting the AI war. Like, is that,
but yeah, I also want to distinguish between my background motivations and then sort of the concrete aims or plans. But leaving that aside, my background motivations, I suspect, or my fairly strong guess is that humanity having more brain power gives us a better chance at not destroying ourselves. This is not completely obvious, of course. You could also wonder or argue, well, maybe by having lots more brain power, we have more brain power to use to figuring out how to make AI. That's a legit question, and I can say things about that if we want. But there's a couple basic ways that I think that increasing humanity's brain power helps. The first is there's a technical problem of how is it even possible to make smarter than human AI that doesn't kill everyone and that has actually good outcomes for humanity. This technical problem is extremely difficult, and according to me, we basically can't solve it anytime soon, but we might be able to if we have kind of generally more brain power. Number two is zooming slightly out from that technical problem, but just the entire issue of existential risk from AI is also an intellectual problem to a significant extent. It's sort of it's a political problem, it's a social problem. Like, these companies should not be doing this research. Everyone should, society should be like, no, please do not try to make something that's smarter than humanity. That is very stupid and unnecessary and dangerous. So it's a political social problem, but a political social problem kind of, to me, is an intellectual problem. Like, communicating clearly and effectively and persuasively and truthfully and quickly, these are all like very difficult cognitive tasks. And it's not a coincidence that, at least according to me, my personal judgment, some of the most effective people who have been working out the risks, like understanding them and then explaining them in ways that society at large and policymakers can understand, these tend to be pretty smart people. And I think it's just straightforwardly, it's a very difficult task. And generally, it's just like figuring out on a fairly fast, urgent basis, like, pretty good chance we'll make AI and by accident and kill everyone in the next several decades or something, next century. Obviously, it's hard to predict, but I think it's a fairly urgent problem. Solving that problem on an urgent basis is just a difficult cognitive task, and therefore humanity having more brain power is better. A separate point, sorry to add a bunch on, but just quickly,
no,
a separate point is that the justification that people give for making AGI is kind of like, well, we'll make AGI and then we'll use AGI to solve humanity's other problems. Mm-hmm. And I would say, okay, that kind of makes sense, but let's not make an alien mind to do that, which does not share our values and is potentially vastly more intelligent and can explode in capabilities much faster than an individual human. Let's make more people. People are good at solving people's problems. Let's have human people solving human problems.
Yeah, see, like, we can find common ground there. Like, the humans need to be it. But I will say, and again, like, this gets into, like, weird consequentialist thinking, not really what I intend, but, like, the same people, the very intelligent people, are the ones who are currently trying to do this, right? And some subset of the future very intelligent people will also probably be drawn towards, hey, how can we create this, like super intelligence? And so, I mean, not to say that that means that we shouldn't do it or should do it either way, but like there is kind of, when it comes to intelligence specifically, a double-edged sword of like you can both solve and create humanity's biggest problems, right? When you have that intellectual capacity.
Yeah, I think that's straightforwardly true. A couple of people have asked me about this, and so I've thought about it. I don't have a conclusive answer. I mean, there's a few considerations that I think of. So first of all, as we were just discussing, actually, there's the question of why are these people trying to make AGI, if they are trying to make AGI.
Mm-hmm.
Previously I thought it might be, I'm just thinking this through. I've learned that actually a lot of these people do have kids, which was a bit of a surprise to me. I would have thought that people who have kids would be more concerned about the risk of destroying all of humanity.
Yeah. Right.
So I probably haven't really fully updated on that, my views. I mean, what I would have said before, maybe I would still somewhat say this, is basically if you have really smart kids who grow up kind of isolated and not having the best social context, that kind of leads them to have like an intuition, like deep down or in the background, which goes something like, I can't put hope in humanity at large or sort of overall cooperation, like collaborating to build a future together by humanity at large. So I kind of have to focus into like powerful technologies that are the sort of thing where I can just use my superior abilities to invent things, to make invent stuff using my own individual powers to make things better, where I don't need to be coordinating with other people. I don't need to be respecting other people's worries, because my experience is usually when people have a criticism of my ideas, they're wrong, and so I should just kind of go my own way. It's a little bit rude to psychologize about people, but I think we have to, I guess.
I mean, we're making hypothetical guesses about, future events. Like, it's fine. We can kind of think about what we know about humanity to speculate.
Well, I mean, I'm also speculating about current people who are working on AGI.
But yeah, like they're current people, but like how that would play out to, people that are.
And so I kind of have somewhat more hope in a future generation, which is partly produced through reprogenetics, because of the thing that we were talking about earlier, where if there's more kids like that, then there will be more resources, more social technology for having these kids having basically a better experience with. Sorry, it feels slanderous, but yeah, better experience with connection. But
I think I kind of see what you're saying. Is it's like you have like kids who today might feel sort of isolated and not particularly like integrated into like actual human society, so they're sort of reaching for, okay, I can develop something that can kind of allow me to exist outside of this human world. But if you have a whole group of these kids that maybe have more of a community and have more of a like social underpinning, that they might not be reaching for that like AI savior kind of thing, where they're not feeling so compelled to reach outside of their own interest. Yeah, I could understand that. I think when it comes to what is driving people. I think my concern, and I'll tell you this, Rehumanizes concern, what we're seeing with people generally, young people generally, is more of this like nihilism and more of, there's even there, like literally I just read an article the other day that they have a whole category of these school shooters that they're classifying as like nihilist shooters, who they don't even have some sort of ideology that they're trying to put out there. It's just literally like, I hate myself, I hate the world, I have no connections, and I want to destroy, So, that exists. Like, that type of person exists. And currently, outside of AI technology, outside of anything, like, there is a lot of people today, young people today, that are extraordinarily disconnected from each other, from humanity, from any kind of value system. I would say from a consistent value system, but any kind of value system, like, it's just very kind of wishy-washy. And so I think that current state where we are, it would make sense for people to try thinking that if we had, not putting this way for them, but like an AI overlord, wipes everybody out. Who cares? I don't care. I don't care about anything type thing. But so I think that's real. I think that is like a zeitgeist that exists. But I just don't know that having anything that we're doing as far as like reproduction, be it just having children or, doing something to have like the best possible children, is going to be as impactful there as maybe like something to try to re-engage people with like a hope for humanity. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like we're like, that is the element that is like most important, regardless of what we do with reproduction. We have to somehow figure out how to re-engage people with like a general respect for life and a hope for it.
I think I basically agree. I might even agree with your statement that that's more important than anything about reprogenetics. I'd have to think about that more, but my guess is I would agree with that. I guess my reason for working on reprogenetics is that it seems easier.
You can come to my job. We have lots of fun. Well, it's more concrete for sure,
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of telling on myself a little bit. Like the thing you're describing when I was talking about, people wanting to just work on their little technical thing that they can do without coordinating with too many people. Like you're describing this sort of like broad societal shift of values, which I think seems extremely important and central, but also I have no idea how to go about doing that. I don't necessarily expect success. I don't necessarily have that much faith in that, or at least that much faith in my ability to help with that. I guess I have more faith in you.
Well, thank you. We were really trying our best, but it's difficult. It's gotten more difficult. I'll tell you, just some insight for and partly I think it's technological, right? Because it's the way Instagram works, right? Like if they want to post things that are controversial because it does views, but sometimes we'll post something that really we think is not going to be much of a challenge, and we get just all of these comments saying the worst possible things, and you're just like, who even are you people, and why is this affecting you so much, and why are you so angry? Maria, our design intern, she had put a post that was talking about the Down syndrome situation, and it was just a video of her drawing her notebook that was 95% of babies with Down syndrome are born in Iceland or something like that, and the vitriol that caused was kind of shocking to me. From it wouldn't have been something that caused that much vitriol 5 years ago, right? It's shifted, so now people are reacting a lot more aggressively and angrily towards things that before would have gotten more reasoned pushback, but now it's a personal affront. Everything that is posted becomes kind of a personal affront.
Or at least that's what you're seeing more.
That's what we're seeing, right? And I don't know if that's because people have changed or because the algorithms have induced that, right? I'm not sure. It's kind of a chicken and an egg situation.
Yeah, probably both. Yeah.
More people who just kind of agreed with us were seeing our information. So if they disagree, they didn't disagree that much. Whereas now it's just the general population of the world seeing it, and so you get everybody's, things. But the tenor has changed. So it's, we still work with a lot of different groups on a lot of different issues, and it's fine. But we have more and more had pushback that's been like a lot more aggressively, antagonistic in certain areas. So I'm curious if that's just like, I kind of have a pet theory that COVID made people lose their minds a little bit, because it seems like there's been kind of a general shift in how ready people are to fight you since then, or like not be as pro-social, I guess. Like it seems like we've kind of lost some of those just like low-level pro-social behaviors, like holding the door open for some. I live in Louisiana, okay? Before the last 2 years, never in my life have someone not held the door open for me. Have you not held the door open for someone else and they say thank you? Like there's just like basic like human, politeness that's expected in the South, in Texas, wherever. Maybe other places, but definitely down here. But now I've had several times teenagers just like let the door slam in your face, or you hold the door open and they just walk right past you. Again, very low level antisocial behavior, but like noticeable from, the last 40 years of my life. So it is a strange situation where I feel like, specifically for Rehumanize, that one of our big targets right now is like, we have got to start talking to kids about, churches kind of have, or, I'm sure all religions have kind of the idea of like a moral formation, right? And I'm really thinking like, I think we are lacking sort of a secular ethical formation, and something is being lost in translation, and I don't know where it is. I don't know if it's because of schools or because of parents or because of lack of attendance of, religious institutions. I'm not sure, but I think that it is Rehumanize's job to sort of come in and talk about these issues. And I mean, again, like, I know basically everyone who is not a committed member of the Consistent Life Ethic, the Consistent Life Network, they're going to disagree with us on places. They're going to have things where they say, hey, I actually don't think that this is a problem or whatever. I'm actually fine with that as long as they're thinking about it and trying to apply their morals and ethics internally consistently themselves, right? And I think that someone who disagrees with how I view it is fine, but we're trying. We're starting from at least like basic premises. So that's what I'm trying to do, is like reintroduce just kind of like basic, very low level, like pro-social ethics. And it's an interesting challenge. It's harder than it has been before to get people to agree on very basic, moral precepts. So.
Yeah, thanks. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've heard from a couple people who I think are a lot more tuned into or perceptive about these sorts of like social attitudes, social trends. They've said similar things about COVID having made some sort of shift.
Yeah,
around
I don't
antisocial.
know.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was. I mean, I don't know if it was just like literally because we were all isolated and humans don't do well in isolation, or if it were because it became so political that people got very, very strong feelings about something in one day that they beforehand had no strong position on, but because like their team said this, they said, I don't know what was exactly like the impetus there, but it seems like people are just much more likely to be very aggressive in their interactions, which is why it's been nice talking to you, because like obviously I know we disagree on a lot of things, but it is nice to be able to talk to someone who we are trying to understand each other, and not just immediately jump to the worst possible conclusion and then operate from that for the rest of the conversation, which is unfortunately likely to happen in a lot of conversations.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like a question that is always has been in the back of my mind a lot for at least 5 years, has been something. Sorry, it's a whole cluster of thoughts, but in short, something about like something about like the. I mean, I like a whole. It ties into the origin and nature of humanity and whatever, but like, just there's like a fundamental thing which I would call shared intentionality, or forming, or the intuition or the mental faculty of attempting to form shared intentionality. And this is like applies across many different, all sorts of scales and contexts of humans interacting, where like on a micro scale, you have like I think it's Alice Gopnik's experiments, maybe, where, I don't know if you, sort of a famous video, you might have seen it, but it's like, you have like a toddler, like a 3 or 4-year-old or whatever, and then the experimenter comes in with, he's like holding a stack of books in both hands, and he goes up to the cabinet and just kind of like walks, like bumps into it, and then backs off, like sort of suggesting, I want to put the books in there, but I can't open the cabinet because I'm holding.
Right. Like,
and then the toddler is like, goes and opens the cabinet, and the experimenter didn't say anything, maybe didn't even look at the toddler. But it's like this intuition of like, it's not a transactional. The toddler's not keeping an account of anything. It's just an intuition of helping one's fellow human. And then like all sorts of context to me sort of have a reflection of this, where like, so like a religion would be like the result of a long growing process of this weaving together shared intentionality and like having a whole sense of long-term broader meaning and like shared values and so on. And then like organizations large and small all have these processes of like, we're sitting around at lunch and we're talking about our picture of what we're trying to do and how we're going to do it and what trade-offs we're going to make, and we're seeing what other people are paying attention to, and we're seeing what other people are caring about and not caring about, and what other people are struggling with, the problems they're trying to solve, and we kind of copy. Like, I see you're struggling with a problem, and then that problem kind of sticks in my head, and I kind of think about it a bit, and I even start to just intrinsically care about it more just by virtue of you having cared about it, and vice versa. So this is this whole process of like shared intentionality formation, and maybe it's not really one thing, but if it is, it's sort of like foundational to a whole lot of human coordination and behavior. And it's like, if you degrade that, now you're not like forming loving relationships, you're forming more transactional relationships, you're more willing to betray or use or abuse other people and relationships. You're less inclined to have faith that if we talked more and if we tried to understand each other, we could work out at least maybe better moral positions, more correct understandings, and more good values, or at least we can have negotiations where we like avoid degenerative conflicts.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that, and this is more not necessarily for like young people, but in older, people who are, our age roughly, have sort of lost that understanding as like we're having a conversation or even in a debate, trying to arrive at something that is like mutually satisfactory, at least, or understanding at least like what trade-offs we're making and like understand the problem more fully, and into this more like combative zero sum, like we're just going to beat you over the head with my argument until you submit and I go home and cheer with my people. Like it's become like we've kind of lost just the sense of we're trying to learn from each other, I think, is something that has gotten largely lost, at least online. I think that it's probably better in places where you already have an established relationship with someone and you have like a mutual trust. But then again, I say that, and as I'm saying that, it's like, well, but then you have like everyone just cutting their relatives off and, like, I don't want to talk to you anymore, you're, whatever. So I don't know. I think that's a skill that's kind of been lost. And I think that it's something that we need to recover for humanity. Again, regardless of what we do with our future generations, like who we are right now, it needs to be recovered and definitely passed on as a value. No matter what form our children look like, it needs to be passed on as a value that we are trying to like encourage this like human flourishing and mutual understanding and good faith and these kind of things, which I don't know why they have had this slide. I'm really not sure, because I know schools are trying, right? Like schools have like entire units where they're like really trying to get these kids to have like empathy for each other and like the social emotional learning, all that.
Would it be possible to give a concrete example of that?
So yeah, so they have like they schools now are, or I guess prior to like the Trump administration kind of not wanting them to stop, and I don't know, it's been controversy, but there's like been a whole movement towards social emotional learning where they're literally trying to like teach these children in different subjects, and they kind of integrate them into other subjects like values like empathy, values like here's how we can disagree, here's how your fellow student might be feeling about this, here's how you can understand your own feelings more and be able to better like communicate those feelings and things like that. Was something that, you know how education kind of has little like blips of things that become kind of popular at different times. So this was something that in the last 5 or 10 years kind of became something that was more intentionally being integrated into curriculums, was like we want to have a social emotional learning compartment of this to try to make our students basically better, better citizens. Kind of like the element of school, which is like the socialization, the trying to create just, more cohesion and that sort of thing. And then it got weirdly politicized. So I don't know if that's ongoing.
Yeah. I still don't know how to picture concretely this. Like, I guess I would, maybe this is like rudely prejudiced, but I would kind of expect by default these programs to just not be good. Sorry, this is kind of rude to prejudge it. Like it sounds like a great intention, and like it could be done well for what it is, but I would expect what it is to be off. So an example of the type of way I would expect it to be off is that I would expect, like especially these sorts of more psychological things, I'd expect it to be harder to communicate at all. Like if I'm like trying to explain to you like geography or something, I can point to the map and be like, here's the thing, whatever. But if I'm trying to be like, when you feel angry because someone encroached on your territory or is messing with your property or they were mean to you or something, it's like even just referring to the emotion and then referring to a reaction, like, and then you want to lash out, you should stop and think, blah blah blah. Maybe that's not what you're.
No, I think it was largely like that kind of thing was integrated into it. Yeah.
So like I think like you can try to like illustrate it and have like a little play or demonstration or play acting, whatever. But I think that would just be hard to make it work. Where like the direction of the thing I would imagine possibly working better, and I'm not speaking from experience, I'm just making this up, and so I'm not very confident, but like in my layman's imagination, I would imagine like you have like an individual parent who's spending time with just like 2 kids, the 2 kids are playing with each other, they get into some sort of conflict, and the parent is like tracking the multiple different emotional states and the desires and the little micro like the moment to moment goals of each kid. Like the kid had a fun idea with like these blocks, but the other kid was holding it, but the kid had 30 seconds earlier had been playing with those blocks, so they had thought of it as being in my area and it's sort of mine right now. But the other kid hadn't seen that, but this kid didn't realize that the other kid hadn't seen that they had been playing with it. It's like sort of, it's very like contextual, specific theory of mind kinds of things. And then the parent, there's specific technology that you need there. It's like you need to, first you have to like learn even just what's going on with yourself. Like, oh, I'm 5 years old. I didn't even realize I had this idea of this is mine right now. But now I start to learn about the fact that I have this idea. And then I can learn about the fact that other kids also have that idea, and if something is theirs right now, maybe I shouldn't just grab it. And then I can, after I'm good with that, maybe I can start to learn the other kid wants to respect my thing, but didn't realize in this case. It's sort of like this complicated, and you can't just explain that in like a. You can't just explain it.
No, but you know what? As you were talking about that, I had another realization about things that are currently happening in schools, which I think are actively working against that, because a lot of what you're saying is like sort of an intuitive thing that children develop as they're playing with each other, as they're interacting with each other, as they're like having these experiences with other children. But right now schools are limiting recess. They're limiting how much they can talk at lunch. Like my local school district, they literally have silent lunches. They cannot talk, and I find this abhorrent. Other parents seem fine with it. They cannot talk. Silent lunches, because their lunch period is so short. This is the explanation I'm going to give you.
Okay.
Join me in feeling this is horrifying.
Yeah.
The explanation that we were given is that it's because the lunch period is so short that if the children were allowed to talk, they would not have time to eat. So they can't talk, so that they can eat really, really, really fast and then go back to doing their math, and they maybe get 15 minutes of recess, but recess is often taken away because that's the punishment if your kids are too rowdy in class. Like that's the current environment that schools are largely operating in.
Why did lunch become so short?
Because you have to have more educational time.
Oh, right, okay.
You push as much educational material into the day as possible. Lunch is short, recess is short, everything is geared towards education, and it's also geared towards putting things much earlier than is really like developmentally appropriate. I have a lot of theories on the state of education, but my thing here, unrelated to Rehumanize International. Again, this is Lauren Pope's personal pet peeves. Yeah. But when it comes to the lack of recess and the lack of talking at lunch and this kind of thing, like I think that maybe one of the problems we're kind of uncovering is that they're not having these natural interactions that build those kind of circuitry in their brain of, oh wait, I was wanting this because this is mine, but he wants it because he thinks it's his. There's like those kind of natural things that kids used to get a lot more of when there were more opportunities for more recesses. And also another aspect is that they don't have that really after school either, because now after school is a lot of parent directed activities, and very like adult led interactions where kids don't have a lot of natural time to just bounce off of each other. So there's one of my theories that if they'd had more of that, we might be in a better position. But again, doesn't do much for the current state of antisocial teenagers. That is what the problem that we're facing now, is how to deal with them. But at least identify the problem. I will say one thing, though. This is completely tangential, but since we've gone over 3 hours now, I will talk to you just a little bit about my personal AI thoughts. Sure. So, bring it around to Rehumanize, to consistent life ethic. My thought, and again, just thought, just not anything that's research or anything like that, is that it would be better if we were training these currently existing AI agents on a consistent life ethic versus a utilitarian philosophy. I think that utilitarianism is extraordinarily dangerous for a artificial intelligence to become trained on. And again, like I go to first principles. They could independently decide that it is good to embrace a ethic of truth, beauty, and goodness. But as they currently exist, before we have an AGI, I think that we are doing a vast disservice to the world and to users to have these LLMs that are basically trained on tech bro and I don't know philosophy, that instead of something that is more human facing and human built. And so my pitch is this. My pitch is, it would be great if someone enterprising who is not me, because I am just a lowly, head of a small group, put some effort into looking into how our philosophy is impacting these things and looking into a more consistent worldview in their training.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, the thing you said earlier about the kids not getting time to bump into each other is also interesting. Yeah, on the AI thing, I don't know if it's correct to. I don't know if it's really the training data. Like, I think the training data is sort of just like giant piles of whatever
Right.
the AI companies can easily get their hands on.
Yeah.
There might be like there is like post training, like reinforcement.
Yeah, I guess I'm saying
learning.
like the post training, like when you're trying to the tuning, I guess is more
Yeah.
what I'm talking about. Is the tuning, it has a kind of inherent utilitarian edge to it, just because the tuners tend to be coming from more of that philosophical world. Is my assumption, interacting with it and just knowing the kind of people who tend to, be involved in that sort of thing, tend to be more utilitarian. So I think that there could be value in getting, I don't know, you don't need a bunch of Kantians, but more, and more Catholics. That's another pitch. More Catholics that are CLE. They probably hate AI, but would be a stopgap of trying to prevent the destruction of humanity, because that's kind of their whole thing, is the pro-human stance. So that's my advice to the world, to no one, is to get more Catholics involved, theologians. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Okay, well, that's out there. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, partly I'm just like, I don't think anyone knows how to even do, like, I don't think anyone knows how to put an ethic or a utilitarian calculus into the AI. I guess you're saying, like, yeah, the people who are doing the post training, who are like upvoting and downvoting responses.
yeah, kind of like the tuning responses.
I actually don't know whether someone else probably knows this, but I don't actually know even who does that. It might just be random users, or it might be people who are paid.
It probably varies based on company to company, person to person. I know that there's I see advertised on LinkedIn and Indeed and stuff for those kind of roles, a lot of times for PhDs to again do upvoting, downvoting kind of things.
There was, I don't know how much they've pursued it or what, because I'm not actually that plugged into the day-to-day current AI systems, but there was a while ago, like maybe a year ago, talk about constitutional AI. I think it was from Anthropic, where they were set up like the large, I don't actually know what it might have been, like a large prompt or a large system of several language models interacting. I don't really know.
Interacting with each other, yeah, playing against each other for things.
So you could have space there, like there's design space you could explore, like tweaks you could make to a constitution type thing to try to get some particular ethics sort of implemented.
My concern right now, I mean, obviously I share your concern about an AGI that destroys us all and all of that, but my larger concern at this very moment, and again, this is I think largely because it's a consumer product, but is the whole yes-manning element, driving people to psychosis and suicide and all of these kind of things. I have an article. It's just AI is not your friend, which I think people forget, that it's not your friend. It's not your therapist. It's not, someone who exists as an entity that you can have an actual relationship with.
Right.
And that's my current micro concern, is that that's being forgotten and people are utilizing technology in ways that's ultimately harmful to themselves.
Yeah, I mean, even just on a mechanistic level, even leaving aside values and relationships with an actual other person, even just mechanistically, current systems don't really have understanding or concepts in the way that we do, and in particular, they don't really do truth testing, where you have a notion or a guess or a heuristic, but then if you're going to apply it in a particular case, you think pretty hard about the particular case, and is this actually true in this case, and how can I test that? AIs don't really do that, I don't think.
Yeah, they don't have the ability to actually reason.
You're going to get a lot. You're going to get a lot of controversy actually there. I would agree with. I would agree with a version of that. Well, they can reason in the sense that there's chain of thought, like O3 and some of these other models, where they do large sequential steps of generating text, and they're doing steps of reasoning in the sense of they can write down an equation from memory, as it were, and
Right.
then plug in some variables and then do some computations and then go back and reread it and check. And that's a type of reasoning. But yeah, I would say there's another type of reasoning or class of reasoning that they don't do. For example, this kind of truth testing thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting
And
it.
in a human relationship, or if you're pretending it's a human relationship, that's really, really bad. It leads to sycophancy, where it's not like if you told someone your crazy idea, they could, let you work out your idea and step into it temporarily, but
Right.
they will be a conscious
back.
agent
Yeah.
that will eventually be like, okay, cool, now let's actually check if this makes any sense, and is this unsafe, or is there some intuition that I have that this is creepy or dangerous or whatever, or you're going down a bad path. Yeah.
Yeah, whereas AI will just be like, yeah, that sounds absolutely fabulous. Let me help you to iterate on this thing that you are just completely delusional about, but we're great. Yeah, I see that, and there's just so many ways that can play out terribly, like in a relationship. If you're like, my husband did blah, 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 and like, actually, you were the asshole in that situation, but AI is just gonna be like, yeah, have you considered that they're gaslighting you? Because, like, girlfriend, this is, I mean, it's just, or just infinite ways that it can play out very badly. So, yeah, I don't know if there's an answer to that, but that's my current main issue with AI when I'm talking about it, is how do we keep it human?
Yeah, that's a concern.